Well, it all comes down to this. The swing states. Well, what are the swing states? Well, we're going to be looking today at Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, because more than likely these are the states that are going to ultimately end up determining who the next president of the United States is. And thankfully, we have our own resident historian and political prognosticator with his own special modeling that we're going to be able to discuss in this episode that will give you everything you need to run right over to the betting markets and make sure you make a lot of money on election day. I'm just kidding. I did not recommend that you go gamble on this, but I'm just saying. Anyways, so what we're going to discuss today is we're going to do a state-by-state analysis of what has been happening in each of these swing states, why they're swing states, what are the sort of trends that we are seeing that cause us to believe who is going to win. Because we're going to give you a prediction for who's going to win each swing state, and we're going to get a little bit more detailed. We're going to talk a little bit about how much we think they're going to win it by, why we think they're going to win that, what are the sort of trends that lead us to those conclusions. Plus, Christian, again, our very own political prognosticator, has developed a model which has been highly successful in predicting elections here in Virginia. And there's been one state out of these swing states in particular that he has been able to apply a rich amount of data with his model. And so we're going to put it on him to give us some specifics, some details on Pennsylvania, which is arguably the most important swing state in this election. All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I am your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates, but other than that, a reasonably good guy. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone. I do need to say one little thing, and that is all of you tuning in who don't already know Christian, you should know he is the most pessimistic predictor you have ever met, and it's always super sad when he's correct because he's always saying we're gonna lose, doom, it's over, and he's almost always right, and that's what really is so scary. However, I say that because I think he is the most optimistic I have ever seen him, and I don't want you guys to think that he's just always this chipper and nice and happy about these things. You need to know this.
Why are you giving away the end? This is why nobody, like, you're like,
no,
you didn't even do a spoiler alert on that.
I'm just saying that you should know he is the master of doom. We always say he's the purveyor of doom. Like, this is doom always. And so,
and we're not even out of introductions yet.
So if he's not doom and gloom, don't be shocked here. That, like, don't think that he's just always happy and jovial like this. No. So I need people to know that, like, there's a
and our resident historian and political prognosticator and apparently purveyor of doom. Here's what I would say about Christian. Yes, there's a little purveyor of doom in there, but honestly what it is that he is rigorously dedicated. He wants to be accurate. Christian and I have actually had fights about this before. Again, political prognosticator, resident historian Christian Hines. Christian, how are you doing?
The joy is gone from the Harris campaign, and apparently we've sapped it for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I will say this. Christian and I have gotten in like arguments over this before because there have been election cycles where Christian has been like, dude, we're doomed. We're not winning this. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to get out there and rally people to vote and do stuff like that. I don't get to be doom and gloom. And that's because, my job and the capacity I had was I needed to encourage people to get to the polls, to believe that, look, if we fight hard enough, we can win. Christian's job is to be accurate with respect to his analysis of the data. And so he's always done that. By the way, also with us in the studio today, Lagartha, the teacup Yorkie of death. She may look sweet, but I'm telling you right now, she raided an English monastery on the way over here today. So just don't let the sweet look fool you. She's a savage. Okay.
Do you remember 2017?
Yes, I don't want to talk about 2017. I don't want to talk about 20. We lost 15 seats in the House of Delegates.
I remember making a bet with my friend Dustin Curtis, and I'm like, guys, I think we're going to lose like 13 or 14 seats. And this was like when you were going around and saying like, oh, we might lose like 1 or 2 on the margins.
We're gonna lose some. We got to be realistic.
And like Dustin and some other good friends of mine, Mike Wood was another one, and they were like, I could see us losing like 5 or 6 or 7. I'm like, no, we're going to lose like 13 or 14 seats. We might actually lose the House. And we actually didn't. We won it by pulling a name out of a bowl. But Dustin, he was like, Christian, if we lose more than 14 seats in the House, I'll buy you a steak dinner.
Yeah. Did you ever get it?
I did collect that dinner.
It was at a good place.
You know what? I gave him a discount. I let him take me to an Italian place.
For a steak dinner?
Yeah. In retrospect, he
Don't
ripped me off.
Well, I've had a good steak at an Italian place before. It's not my go-to.
But the point is like, I mean, you and I have been working in Virginia politics on both the volunteer and a professional side since like 2011 or 12.
Yeah.
And I remember you and I went to the Fishersville rally in 2012.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, we lost in 2012. We lost in 2013, 14. Yeah. We barely held on in 15. 16, we lost. 17, we got wiped out. Yep. 18, we got wiped out. 19, we got wiped out. 20, we lost the congressional race and we got wiped out. So, I mean,
we've actually had situations where Christian is looking at us just a week before the election or a few days before the election and going, we're going to lose. We're losing.
Which is always good.
Win.
You're like looking at him going.
It just takes the wind out of your sails. Like Nick was running for Congress at the time, and we finally had to be like, Christian, we have to fight this all the way to the end. And you telling us that we are absolutely going to lose just takes all.
Well, especially when this was the same Christian Hines that a year earlier was like, Nick, you have to run. I'm like, I don't want to run. You have to. This is you have to run. And then 2 weeks before the election, he's like, I don't think we're going to win. I'm
we're
like,
losing. No.
Dude, go sit outside.
No, he was like, I guarantee you, we're losing. We're losing.
So some advice for the audience. Some advice for the audience. You will not last long on a congressional campaign if you're telling the candidate and the staff that you're going to lose.
You begged to run.
The only reason, so I worked on Nick's campaign for the last few months. I came on board. I left my previous job and came on board to help with number crunching and some other stuff for the last 2 months of the campaign. I'm pretty sure the only reason they didn't fire me was because I was friends with the candidate. Because you typically can't get away with demoralizing your own side.
All of our volunteers were just like, okay,
well,
I'm supposed to drag myself
Let's be honest here. That's not true. It's not like he went out to all the volunteers and said, we're doomed.
No,
there was
an internal high-ranking
There was an internal
folks.
circle.
It was the whole
let's be
staff.
honest there.
It was
all right,
the staff.
Listen. Moving on, because we got to get to each of these states. But first, you want to know how you actually win elections? You win it with an informed electorate that loves freedom. You know how to create an informed electorate that loves freedom? Tuttle Twins. Right? I say this in all seriousness. I say this as a homeschooling parent. I say this as someone that serves in the General Assembly and desperately wants our kids to actually understand civics and economics and critical thinking. And I can't think of a better way to be able to teach these ideas or these concepts to your children, your young children, than the Tuttle Twins. And right now, you can get 66% off the season 1 book series when you go to the link in the description of this podcast, right? Your kids are going to learn about the law from Frederick Bastiat. They're going to learn about inflation from Milton Friedman, civil disobedience from Harriet Tubman, and How to Destroy the Economy from Karl Marx, right? All there within the Tuttle Twins. And not only do you get the book series, but there's also, you can go and get the Angel app and you can watch the Tuttle Twins for free. It is a great cartoon. It really is one of those cartoons that, look, anybody that's been a parent knows you've probably watched a lot of cartoons with your kids, and you always appreciate the ones that always have appropriate humor and themes for the kids, also informs them along with entertaining them, but is also something that the parents can enjoy. And I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of kind of sarcastic jokes in there that the parents pick up on and oh, I see what you did there. Right? So really fun to watch, plus 66% off the book series if you use the link in the description. I am highly encouraging you, add this into your kids' curriculum, whether they go to public school, private school, whether you homeschool. If you are looking for something that is very accessible to kids, this is a great way to do it. And like I said, something that the adults can enjoy as well. So go to the link in the description, Tuttle Twins, download the Angel app, get the books. You're not going to be disappointed. I promise. I promise you. That's a Nick Freitas promise, right? Again, this is something we've used for our kids too. So it's not as if some advertiser just showed up and said, hey, we'll give you money to promote something. No, we love this stuff. We have used it ourselves. It is really good. Can't praise it highly enough. All right. Christian.
Yeah, basically, if you want your kids to be garbage, right? According to the
Vote for the garbage man.
Vote
It's
for the
important.
garbage.
According to Biden, we're all trash.
Garbage.
We could mix it all and say we're a trash basket of deplorables.
Trash basket of deplorables.
Well, you know, with Hillary, she just called half of us deplorables. Half of his supporters deplorable. But apparently all of his supporters are garbage. And according to Harris, also Nazis.
Okay.
So,
Alrighty, now that we have explained all the horrible things that we apparently are, we're going to start with Georgia. And we're going to start with Georgia because for most of my time growing up, for most of my life on this planet, most of the 45 years I've existed and looked at U.S. elections, Georgia was always one that we could absolutely count on to be in the Republican column. But the last several years, especially with the massive expansion of the Atlanta suburbs and people moving from blue states, trying to get away from that horrible tax policy, trying to get away from that unfriendly business environment, have now moved to a state that had a good business environment and low taxes and have voted blue and don't understand why. Anyway, so let's talk about Georgia. Christian, where are we at in Georgia?
So, caveat, fun fact. I remember the summer of 2020, I wrote on Facebook and I'm like, we're going to lose Georgia.
Yeah.
and like I didn't really like make it public. It was just on Facebook, although I still have the screenshots from the original post. And I was like, the reason why is because the North Atlanta suburbs. It's counties like Gwinnett, it's counties like Cobb, it's Northern Fulton, it's Cherokee, Forsyth. We actually have a member of our Minecraft community that's from Forsyth.
Yeah.
And I was just looking at this nuclear bomb that was going off in the North Atlanta suburbs, and I'm like, that's going to cost us the state, and lo and behold, it did. But fast forward to today, and we're kind of in a different environment. So Georgia was the closest state in 2020, right? It was decided by about like 16,000 votes officially.
Yeah.
And the polling today is it's very tight, no doubt about it. But out of all the swing states, Georgia's probably the most favorable in terms of a potential for it to swing back. And the reason why is because the Democrats were able to just get over the line through kind of like the stars aligning. They had sky-high black turnout. They had the suburbs openly revolting against Donald Trump. And these are suburbs that traditionally are very Republican. The North Atlanta suburbs overwhelmingly voted for candidates like George Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney. And they even though they slipped in 2016, they still voted for Trump in 2016. But in 2020, they just bolted away from him. Look at the situation today, and a lot of those voters are coming home. And not only that, but like you're seeing it in the demographic returns. So like Georgia doesn't have party registration, but you can look at demographic returns on a county basis or a racial basis, especially because it's a southern state, and black Southerners tend to vote a little bit differently than Northern Southerners because of things like the legacy of like the civil rights movement and stuff like that. And so,
What do you say? You said, wait, say that again. You said Northern Southerners.
Or sorry, I meant to say black Southerners vote differently than black Northerners.
Okay.
So a black voter in Atlanta will vote slightly differently than a black voter in Philadelphia. I think that Trump has the potential, and when we get to Pennsylvania and Michigan, we might talk about this. I think Trump actually has a real potential to pick off some black voters in those two states, but he's probably unlikely to make huge gains with black voters in Atlanta because they're just different than the black voters in Philadelphia and Detroit. And so that's it.
Well, I mean, this is the part where it's you know, again, it's interesting because every single state that employed Jim Crow did so under Democratic rule. The Democratic Party was ruling in every state when they were in applying Jim Crow, but the Democratic Party also did a good job under Lyndon Johnson as marketing themselves, at least a portion of the Democratic Party, as being pro-civil rights, even though you had more Republicans voting for it than you did Democrats. And the end result has been is that there has been this association with the Jim Crow era with Republicans, even though I don't think there was a single Republican-controlled state that was implementing Jim Crow policies.
There's also a community bond to it. So, like, in Pennsylvania and Michigan, it's a machine that turns out black voters in Philadelphia and Detroit. Whereas in Georgia, it's not a machine so much as it's a community. It's identifying as part of the Democratic Party is part of your identity if you're from Atlanta or DeKalb. And so it's just a different dynamic. It's not like party machine politics that's driving it out. It's your community bond is driving it out. But one thing that we've seen, though, is that black turnout has plummeted in Georgia. It's currently sitting at like 26% right now. Georgia's far more than 26% black. And so a lot of black voters, and this is the case especially with younger black voters that don't feel the poll of like the legacy of the civil rights movement, which took place over 60 years ago, they don't look at that and say, well, because of something that happened 60 years ago, I must be a Democrat today. It doesn't carry over the way that it did with older generations, because they've never lived in a time, back in the 60s or 50s in a state like Georgia. And instead, they're worried about things like inflation, right? They're worried about things like the cost of living. And so a lot of them are revolting against the Democrats, not necessarily by voting for Trump. Some of them are, especially the younger men. And this is a reoccurring thing that we're going to see in every single state. Younger, male, black, former Democrats, Trump is going to get a larger percentage of them than any Republican probably since Richard Nixon in 1960. But another form of revolt that this group is engaging in is not just voting for Trump, it's also they're staying home. And you're seeing a gender gap emerge between black women and black men, where black men are just staying home. They're not enthusiastic at all to vote for Kamala Harris, whereas black women are showing up to vote for her. So that's the first issue that they've got in Georgia, is black turnout is plummeting. And they're not able to get their own base to the polls because they're not enthusiastic. This
probably also explains. Well, and then when they bring out people like Barack Obama and literally gets out there and just chastises black men that, well, I guess you're just not ready for a female president. It's like, what? And then again, we saw the response to that on social media. And again, you can always selectively choose what you want on social media. But it was amazing how easy it was to find black men that were coming on responding to Barack Obama like, don't talk to me that way.
They're angry.
Well, and it's,
and I don't blame them.
And it's completely understandable, because this always seems to be this popular Democratic playbook. If you're not doing what I want, it has to be because you're racist, because you're sexist, because you're transphobe, because you're this. Because could it just be that I don't agree that this is a good person to lead the country? Could it just be that I don't agree with the policies that this person is putting out there, or I don't believe that she will effectively implement them? Nope, that cannot be a consideration. And because they refuse to actually answer those concerns, they just go back to the same trope that has, quite frankly, worked for them, and now it's not. It's the value of that particular trope is decreasing significantly. Torino, thank you for the super chat, comes in and goes, speaking of Georgia, hi from Georgia. I see Trump Vance signs everywhere. Unfortunately, my family believe the hearsay, and it's rough. Yeah, I will say this. One of the things that we always joke about on campaigns is, signs don't vote, but it still is encouraging to people when they see a lot of signs out there. It feels like an indication that things are going well.
And if you're running a write-in, it's very important so that way people know how to spell your name correctly.
Yes. Okay, we're not going to get into that. Stick to Georgia.
But so one thing that's working in Republicans' favor is that black turnout is plummeting, in part because the Democrats have quite literally lost the ability to speak to their own base. This is a reoccurring theme you're going to see as we go through each of these states, is Democrats have increasingly become the awful party. They have become the party of the internalized managerial class, the party of Arlington and Alexandria, not the party of, Fulton County, right? Or the party of Cobb County or Gwinnett County. Like they don't know how to speak to normal people. They only know how to speak to the bureaucracy, to the blob, to the Leviathan. And so like what this means is that when you look at the traditional Democratic base, they're hemorrhaging all across the board with union voters. They're hemorrhaging with working class whites. They're hemorrhaging with minorities, with Hispanics and black voters. They're hemorrhaging with younger voters, which is another core component of the Democratic base. All four of the major historical core components of the Democratic Party base, they're hemorrhaging voters with right now. But the other thing, the last thing that I'll get to when it comes to demographics in Georgia is there's a bit of a rebound effect in the North Atlanta suburbs, which are much more white. So Georgia's very racially polarized in the Atlanta metro area. You have black voters clustered in Atlanta and DeKalb, and then you have white voters in the North Atlanta suburbs. And the North Atlanta suburbs were traditionally very Republican, but they revolted against Trump in 2020. And in part because we imported a bunch of Californians that were not ever Republicans. And they moved to places like North Fulton or Gwinnett, and they're just voting blue no matter who. But the more traditional Republican-leaning voters, they've seen the last 4 years, and they're like, I want my money back. Quite literally, I want my money back. And so I think that you're going to see a rebound effect where, look, if Trump is even improving just a point or two in some of these places, that's a sign that he's going to flip the state back. When you have lower black turnout and an increased Republican share in places that we dropped by like 15, 20 points over the last 8 years, That's enough to flip a 16,000 vote deficit in a state like Georgia.
Well, okay, so RT asked, question, Christian, you're looking at the Atlanta metro. What about Georgia's Southwest Plains area who continue to vote Democrat even though Democrat Party has changed values?
Two things. So the southern part, the black belt that runs through the middle of the state, and to clarify to people, black belt means the content of the soil. I know that there actually are a lot of black voters in that area, but it's called that because of the content of the soil. The black belt that runs through the middle of Georgia historically was the most Democratic part of rural Georgia because you had a combination of rural black voters and rural southern whites that were the last bastion of southern white voters in the state. And those two groups were aligned and they both voted Democrat. And so you had this swath of counties in the middle of the state that voted blue and then the Atlanta area that also voted blue. You're seeing erosion with Democrats in the black belt in part because those working class southern whites in the black belt, they're revolting against the Democrats. And the southern rural black voters, they're very conservative. They're very conservative. They identify with the Democratic Party as an identity label, but they hold very conservative, socially conservative values. And they're looking at what the Democratic Party's standing for, and they're like, I'm voting for the identity. I'm not voting because of transing the kids. Like, if that's what you're campaigning on, then you haven't given me any reason to show up and vote. And so you're seeing collapsing turnout. And you're seeing swings to the right with that group as well. And understand, when I say swings to the right, I mean we're not losing them 90-10, right?
Yeah,
I mean we're losing them 80-20 now. But again, even just any gains on the margin with that group is enough to flip back a state like Georgia. And so long story short, when we look at the Real Clear Politics average, there's a reason that the RCP average shows Trump is leading by 2.4 right now in Georgia. Because
which at that stage, well, and again, I think people have been kind of programmed to believe that any state that is within 3 points is a swing state or is a legitimate pickup. And what you're saying is that this stage of the game, with all the trends that we're seeing, Georgia's probably going for Trump. What percentage do you think he's going to win by? And Georgia, again, I'm gonna clarify this for the audience. Georgia is not one of the areas where Christian's being able to plug his data into his model, so you're not going to get the same specifics. But okay, Georgia, where do you anticipate, based off of the thing that is going on, where do you think Trump's going to land?
I think Trump wins it by 2 to 3.
Okay, 2 to 3 points in Georgia. Do you think this is it going to be something where we see 3 days of more votes coming in, or do you think we know on election night?
So Georgia was notorious in 2020 for it took them days to call Georgia, right? Because it was like one of the closest states. But they've changed some of the rules with the Secretary of State's office for how they count ballots, especially early ballots. The legislature passed a lot of voter integrity laws since 2020. So first off, for anybody dooming, the election is very secure in Georgia. I have a very high degree of confidence that Georgia's going to be doing it right this year. They've changed a lot of their COVID era rules. And I think that the speed in which they're going to be counting those votes is going to be, I think, much, much faster than 2020.
This is an important thing to remember. Like in a lot of our voting laws in Virginia got changed during a special session of the General Assembly in 2020, in 2019. So it got changed in 2019. We even had a judge come out later and say this was not the proper way to change your voting laws. But at that point, it didn't matter. The votes had already been cast. And so the issue that we ran into was that there was a whole host of things that were done, ballot drop-off boxes that didn't have to have continuous monitoring, and we're starting to see problems in places like Washington State where somebody slipped an incendiary device into a ballot box and destroyed because there's no way to actually monitor it.
This is why our people need to vote early in person. I highly recommend you vote early. It's very easy to do it, but vote early in person. The last anecdotal piece of data that I'll provide is I've got a friend who's Korean, and he's got family that lives in Gwinnett County. There's a very large Asian community in Gwinnett County. Yeah. They voted for Biden. He told me this himself. They voted for Biden in 2020, and they voted for Ossoff and Warnock in the runoffs.
Oh, wow.
And they're voting for Trump right now because they're upset about immigration and inflation. Yeah. And the immigration issue is also a huge issue in the Atlanta metro area. There's been thousands of illegal immigrants pouring in. Laken Riley was that murdered college student that was killed by an illegal immigrant in Georgia. So it's a very personal issue in Georgia right now. That has been an infuriating issue. And again, these groups that swung to the left in 2020 in a state like Georgia, they've come back just enough that I think that if we look at our 270 to win map here, I think that people will like the map that we've got. For our audio listeners, here's a map of the Electoral College of the entire country. And we've got our coloring here for safe Democrat, safe Republican, likely Democrat, likely Republican, lean Democrat, lean Republican, and toss-ups. And now we'll color them in with tilt. And I am going to put Georgia in the tilt Republican column.
Okay.
So now we're at 235 to 226 for Trump right now.
So not solid red, not a foregone conclusion, but tilt.
Well, yeah, Christian's saying it's gonna Georgia's tilting and Georgia is gonna be going over. So again, the current breakdown based off of our analysis here today, 226 for Democrats so far, 235 for Republicans. All right, let's move on to our. Let me see if I got any other questions about Georgia. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and move on to North Carolina. So this is
Hamilton's from here.
Another state. Yeah, Hamilton. The good Hamilton is from North Carolina. Lives in North Carolina. This is another state that, for as long as I can remember, we didn't even consider this to be a swing state. It was always voting red, and it has consistently voted red, right? It's
except for 2008.
Yeah, it broke in 2008. But it's been fairly dependable. But again, it is another one of those places where it's seeing a lot of people moving in from bluer states, seeking out a business-friendly environment, low taxes, and again, if you are fleeing a state in part because of either a lack of opportunity or maybe high taxes or high regulations or an unfriendly business environment, please think about these things before you vote for the same thing in the place that you're moving to. All right, North Carolina, go ahead and give us the rundown, Christian.
So here's a really interesting piece of data. First point, Real Clear Politics average shows that North Carolina is closer than Georgia. There is a very good chance, and I believe that this is actually going to be the case, where North Carolina is going to be voting to the left of Georgia this year.
Okay.
Traditionally, that was actually true, right? In 2008, it voted for Obama. Georgia voted for McCain. In 2012, they both voted for Mitt Romney, but North Carolina was to the left of Georgia. In 2016, North Carolina was to the left of Georgia. It was only in 2020 that Georgia was to the left of North Carolina for a variety of factors that we previously talked about. I think that what's going to happen right now, and a lot of people are surprised about it, but what's happening is a reversion back to the mean, where North Carolina is going to go back to being to the left of Georgia. And so the Real Clear Politics average shows that Trump is leading by 1 point right now in the RCP average. And there have been polls that came out. Atlas Intel, which was actually the most accurate pollster of the 2020 election cycle, Atlas Intel has Harris leading in North Carolina by 1 point right now. So it's not inconceivable that Harris could flip this state. In fact, Nate Silver says that North Carolina is the second most likely state to be the tipping point state of this cycle. And by tipping point state, he means the state that will give the winner their 270th electoral vote.
So let me ask you this. Do we think that is in part because of a combination of, obviously, the Raleigh-Durham area has gotten a lot more liberal over the years, the Raleigh-Durham triangle. But then you also had a massive, flood and weather storms that went through. Now, Asheville is very liberal, but the rural areas around there are not.
Yeah.
So
and there were people on the left that said that because of this natural disaster, it would probably help us. And
they came right out and said it.
There were people in Kamala Harris's circle campaign that were basically glad that something had happened like that to displace people so they would have a harder time voting in the very red areas.
I heard that with my own ears. I've been in many Twitter spaces recently.
Yeah.
Fun fact, a few days ago, I hosted a 5-hour Twitter space that lasted until 3 a.m. It had like 2,000 people listening.
Yeah.
My Twitter account blew up over the last month because of all the election data that I've been tweeting about. But
so, do you think that impacts the vote in North Carolina? Do you think that's part of the reason why it might be moving?
So this is something that a lot of election people have been paying really close attention to, is what happened in Western North Carolina. I know that some Democrats, unfortunately, were cheering the hurricane, quite literally. I've heard it with my own ears, cheering the hurricane, which really infuriated me. But no, you're seeing it in the returns where this is actually not true. The hurricane and the botched federal government response to the hurricane has actually enraged these voters. It truly enraged these voters. If you look at the turnout maps in North Carolina and you look at the western counties, they have set records for the highest number of early votes cast. And these are counties that voted like 2-1 for Trump, in some cases 70-30 for Trump. These are very Republican-heavy counties.
Yeah.
In the western part of the state, they got devastated by the hurricane, and yet the turnout is through the roof. And I think it's through the roof because they saw that, like, right after the hurricane, Kamala Harris herself was tweeting things like, "We're going to send $158 million to Lebanon."
Yeah.
at the time when like people had no homes or electricity.
At the same time
here.
At the same time that FEMA had spent, I believe at that point it was, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars on funding to local communities that were basically saying we need assistance as a result of mass illegal immigration.
Yeah, because an emergency situation had been caused by their border program.
So they had caused a problem. Then they were using FEMA funds in order to respond to it. And when Republicans were calling them out for this, they were saying they were getting fact checked as, oh, it's a lie. FEMA did not reorient funds from North Carolina to these communities. It's like, whoa, back up. What was said is that funds that most people believe are designed for emergencies and to a large degree national disasters within the United States did get reallocated toward communities that were dealing with mass migration issues. Now, it's interesting. I don't see FEMA with that same level of concern for places like Texas and Florida when they're dealing with massive migration issues. But as soon as those migrants were sent to New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., then all of a sudden it was, we need to get funds to these people as soon as possible.
It's only an emergency when it affects them. But we're also seeing sort of a resurgence of this problem with FEMA. I've been seeing a lot of rumblings on X about there are line workers who are striking because they haven't been paid in 8 weeks. They're supposed to be getting paid by the federal government to be there, getting them back on track. And they haven't been paid in 8 weeks. And so the Kamala Harris administration, Biden administration, they did whatever it took to tamp down the grumbling. But now they never made good on what they promised. And now people are realizing, oh no, these people actually aren't getting paid.
Yeah.
They're working for free right now, which apparently the Democrats have always loved the idea of having people work for free.
I want to say something too. Andrew, I know we got a super chat here. You got a question with respect to Michigan. We are going to get to that as soon as we get to Michigan because that's coming up, but I want to save that question for the category that we're talking about it in. So in North Carolina, we see an influx of people coming from out of state, moving to the Raleigh-Durham triangle because there's been a lot of it. I mean, great business opportunities in North Carolina. It's something we've talked about in Virginia. It's like, what has North Carolina been doing? Well, good regulatory policy, low taxes, and consistency. This is another thing that I end up getting in fights with sometimes my fellow Republicans where they think that the way that you foster a good business environment is you do these little select deals for the companies that have they can come in and say, we'll create so many jobs and you give us this break here and this break here, where it's like, well, no, consistency over time is actually a good way to do this. And it does seem that North Carolina, not to say they haven't engaged in some of those behavior as well, but it does seem that they've done a fairly good job of creating a very consistent, dependable, pro-business environment. And part of that also comes from the fact that North Carolina is not, especially in their state legislature, I believe they now have a veto-proof conservative majority within their state legislature.
It's hanging on by a thread.
Like one vote, I think, in the House or something like that.
This year's state legislative elections are going to be crucial because we're almost certainly going to lose the governor's race. And if they hold the supermajority, then they'll be able to override in any vetoes from Josh Stein, who's probably going to become the next governor in that state. And that's really important, of course, because there's things like universal school choice that's potentially going to be coming up in North Carolina in the near future, and some other conservative policies that will do a couple things. One, they're just good policies. Objectively, they're good policies. But two, we could be defunding aspects of the left-wing institutional network that they have that allow them to take control of government and of society, right? We've talked at length about it on this show, that part of the reason that the left wins is because they hijack institutions. Well, one of the best mechanisms to do that is through the university and education system. And so if you pass things like universal school choice, not only are you defunding the left, you're funding the parents and the students, and you're sending a message to the left that culturally you're not welcome here. You are not welcome to impose your left-wing values in our state. This is what happened in Florida. So allow me to just very briefly jump off North Carolina for just a second to go to Florida, because if you recall here, let's go back to the 270 to win map that we've got here. Hopefully it'll load.
Just refresh.
It's okay. There we go. Okay, here we go. Florida is listed as likely Republican.
Yeah.
There's a reason for it.
Yeah. And it's gained electoral votes. It's not like it's decreased in population. It's gained in population and it's becoming more conservative.
So why isn't it classified as safe?
I think we may be
Hang on, Tina.
A couple years away from it, but there's
There we go. It's safe Republican. I guarantee you, I will bet any person any amount of money that Republicans will win Florida.
Yeah.
Guaranteed any amount of money. To give you an idea of how bad the situation is right now in Florida, Democrats are losing the early vote by double digits.
Wow. That's
Florida.
nuts. That never happens for us.
Unironically, there is a chance, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but there is a chance that Trump is going to win Florida by more than 10 points.
Wow. All right, so North Carolina, what do you think? First of all, is there anything else we should be looking at in North Carolina? Anything like unique or strange or departures from the
last
past?
2 final data points before we give the prediction. 1, turnout is through the roof in early voting in North Carolina. Republicans are actually leading the early vote right now in North Carolina, which is historically unprecedented.
Yeah.
2, and the early vote is going to be a huge chunk of all votes cast. It's going to be like half of all ballots cast, maybe even more. 2, there's an account that that I follow that has been building maps showing some of these trends using many of the same data points that I've been pulling. Actually, we've been tweeting back and forth at each other, and we've been largely in agreement here. And this account's called Data Republican. I actually want to throw them out because they've been doing some really good work. And this is an interesting map that they've seen. So they created this this map here of North Carolina. This is a racial map of North Carolina showing the percent that's white.
Yeah.
And so you see Western North Carolina is very white. It's like in many of these counties, it's over 84, 85% white. But in Eastern North Carolina, that's part of the Black Belt. There's a large Black population. And then in the metro areas, there's a large just minority population in general in like Wake County, Mecklenburg County.
Yeah.
So this is the racial map of North Carolina. And this is the expected map of potential gains for Trump.
Oh, that's nuts. Yeah.
And so his biggest gains right now, when you look at the partisan modeling and you look at projecting out what you think election day is going to be, his biggest gains are coming from the most racially diverse parts of the states, particularly the Black Belt. And it's 2 things. One, again, it's depressed Black turnout, and it's some younger Black voters, especially men, switching over to Republicans. And it's Republican gains, especially in places like the Wake County area or the Mecklenburg County area. It's Republican gains with other minority voters, like Asian voters or Hispanic voters in particular. And then in the western part of the state, some of these counties is Trump really driving up the margins with white voters.
Yeah.
And finally just eviscerating the last remnants of Democrats that traditionally were white voters that were traditionally voting Democrat. So what I think is going to happen in North Carolina is it's going to be really, really close.
Yeah.
It's going to be closer than Georgia. But I'm looking at an electorate that's R+1, R+2.
Okay. And do we know on election night?
I do think that we're going to know most likely on. I would say it's not as likely as Georgia, but I do think that we will know the winner on election night, and I think Trump's going to win North Carolina by a point, maybe maybe
so
a point and a half.
So how sure are you that Trump wins by 1.5, a point and a half in North Carolina?
I would give him 70% odds that he wins by about a point or a point and a half.
Point and a half. And you think we know either maybe election night, maybe the next day?
Late election night, maybe
night.
early election morning. It depends on how close it'll be. But
all right.
I'll put North Carolina in the tilt Trump column.
Okay. All right. So now Republicans are up to 251.
Yep, 251
to 226. All right. We're saving Pennsylvania for the last. Let's go to Wisconsin next. So Wisconsin, interestingly enough, Wisconsin historically is the home of progressivism. Mm-hmm. Also the home of the Republican Party. I believe it was actually started in Wisconsin as an anti-slavery movement, as an abolitionist movement. But for some time, Wisconsin was kind of reliably blue.
It voted for Dukakis.
It would.
In 88,
it did.
They voted for Dukakis.
Yeah, which was nuts because very few states did that.
I mean, California didn't even vote for Dukakis.
So
Yeah. So
what
Wisconsin
makes Wisconsin blue like that? What makes them? They were fairly reliably blue. And
there's 3 things that historically make Wisconsin blue. Working class union voters in the Driftless area and the northwestern and northern parts of the state. So this is anything along the Great Lakes shoreline along the northern coast near near the Michigan Panhandle, right? That peninsula that belongs to Michigan, but probably should actually belong to Wisconsin. The Green Bay area, the Driftless area, everything along the Mississippi River Valley, basically in the western part of the state. So that area historically had a very strong working class, blue collar union presence that were Democrats. That was the first pillar. The second pillar is called Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And the third pillar is called Madison.
Yeah.
Which is Dane County. It's their
It's
state
the
capital.
capital.
It's basically San Francisco. No, sorry. It's basically Moscow. Criteria, 1925.
Yeah.
In the middle of the Midwest.
Wow.
It is
Wow.
like
That
literal
marks this
communist
time.
central is Dane County. Like
Wow.
unironically, there's Milwaukee's just Democrat.
Yeah.
Milwaukee's Democrat. Dane is Communist Party of the United States. LARPing as Democrats.
Yeah.
And so those were the three pillars. Now, one of the pillars has been knocked down completely, and that's western and northern Wisconsin has shifted sharply to the right. They are Republicans now. Some of them might not know it, but they are Republicans now. Now, that's being replaced by the wild counties, which are the suburbs around Milwaukee. Historically, the wild counties, which is it's centered in Waukesha County, which is just to the west of Milwaukee, were the Republican part of the state. Like these are counties that voted 65 or 70% for Ronald Reagan. And Trump can't break 60% in some of these counties now. They're very wealthy, and at least in some parts, very wealthy, very historically ancestrally Republican. They're suburbs. Mm-hmm. They were the base of Reagan's core supporters back in the 80s. And because Democrats are increasingly becoming the party of the managerial class, the professional class, the white collar types,
college educated suburban,
those areas are replacing that third pillar. And so the Democrats still have three pillars, but they're just different pillars than they were historically.
Well, in the latest poll, so for a while there, for a fairly consistent amount of time, we saw this kind of all throughout October, early October. Trump was either leading or tied, which, and then all of a sudden you see this one poll coming out from CNN where it had Harris +6. And then you look at the latest ones that have come in. You either see back to a tie or Harris +1. And right now they're saying the spread is Harris +0.2. And part of that is because of that one CNN poll that had her ahead by 6. Now, Wisconsin had at this same time, in 2016, Clinton was ahead by 5.4 points. Biden was ahead by 6.7. So Biden won Wisconsin, but not by much. Certainly not as much as they thought he was going to win it by.
By less than a point.
By less than a point. Like the polls were off by a good, I think, 5 points in Wisconsin.
It was like a 6-point miss.
6-point miss. Wisconsin was actually one of the states that had the worst polling with respect to the miss from election day to. Or maybe I'm wrong. Were they closer?
This is the 2020.
So there you go. The
polling.
RCP average was 6.7, and he actually won by 0.7. So it was one of the ones where the polling was the worst in predicting what the actual outcome would be. Now, a lot of this has been said lately, and people have been saying that Trump's or polling is now adjusted to try to now it's favoring Trump too much. What do you think has been going on with polling kind of in general and specifically like in Wisconsin? Have they tried to figure some of this stuff out? Or so are we getting an accurate reflection here, or are we going to see something similar on election day where it's showing, okay, Harris is only ahead by 0.2, but then she loses by 5? Like, what do you think we're seeing?
So here's a fun fact for you. Look at this October poll from 2020, October 25th, almost exactly 4 years ago today.
Yeah.
This ABC News Washington Post poll.
17.
Biden by 17.
Yeah.
In a state that he won by something like a quarter of a percentage point. By the way, this number here is actually too high. If you actually look at if you actually look at the official margin, I know that people are going to be mad bringing up Wikipedia. I'm only doing it just to show the margin here in Wisconsin. The actual margin in Wisconsin was like a quarter of a percentage point.
Yeah.
It was like 0.2% or something like that.
That's nuts.
So do you think they've made the corrections in the polls? Do you think they were able to identify why the poll was so off? That's kind of it. Polls kind of, they'll be really off in some elections. Then they'll make some adjustments, do some tweaking, and try to kind of adjust for how off they were. But if they're not able to identify what caused them to be off, then how do they make that adjustment? And do you think they did make that adjustment?
So Wisconsin is a hard state to poll because they've always had a shy Trump effect. Twice now it's been, of the swing states, the worst state out of, I mean, as you see, right? I mean, Biden barely won it. And the polling showed that it was going to be a safe Democrat seat, safe Democrat state. And part of the problem is that Trump's base is just really hard to poll in a state like that. I know that the pollsters have changed some of their methodology. They've gone into more areas, historically they would divide the state up into parts, and they would say, well, we're going to get some people from this area, some people from this area, and some people from this area.
Yeah.
Well, they've divided it even more, especially in some of these rural parts of the state and western and northern parts of the state, in order to try to get a better sample size of the shy Trump effect. But the problem is that Trump's campaign, and you're going to see this in some other states, Trump's campaign has explicitly been targeting 0 and 1 out of 4 voters.
Yeah.
And to show you what I mean, my friend Tyler Adams, who we all know here, he works for Ben Klein's office. He called me the other day and he's like, Christian, we're seeing like all these people in Virginia that are coming out of the woodwork, and we don't have any data on them. Like our numbers, our campaign, we just don't have any data on them. And they're making like 18, 19, 20% of the early vote electorate. This is in the 6th congressional district. Ben Klein's the congressman for there.
It's a very conservative district.
It's a very conservative district, Shenandoah Valley. And so I ran the same model that I historically do in Virginia for the 6th district. And look at the propensity here.
Yeah,
this is just two-party. This does not include swing voters. Understand that. This does not include swing voters.
The part that people really need to look at here is the 1 out of 4 and the 0 out of 4, because those are either new voters or people that hardly ever vote. And so, again, this is one of the things where we distinguish between states where Christian has data that he can put into his model versus states that don't. Virginia is one where he has data that he can put into his modeling. So, and that's really important for places like Virginia because we don't have party registration. So we have to analyze what we think voters are going to be based off of their what sort of primaries do they vote in. So if they vote in a Republican primary, that gives an indicator that they're probably a Republican. But we all know, because of things like Project Chaos that Rush Limbaugh did or other things, that sometimes people will cross over and vote in a primary. So anyways, taking all that into consideration, plus all of the other factors that Christian puts into his specific model to have it be something that reliably reflects whether or not a Republican or Democrat is voting. When you have those sort of early numbers out of 2 out of 4, 1 out of 4, 0 out of 4, that's like revolutionary. Like those are massive changes from what we've seen in the past. And some of this is about Republican voters becoming more familiar and more comfortable with voting early, in part because that's what you need to do. You may not like that we have a 45-day election cycle in Virginia, but if that's what it is, then don't hamstring yourself by not fighting with the tools that you have. But it's that 0 out of 4 and 1 out of 4. Like the 1 out of 4 especially, because that's someone that has voted before. They are registered to vote, but they hardly ever vote, even in presidential elections. That's not even a guarantee. And yet 76% to 23% in the 6th district, that means you're having a massive turnout among low propensity voters for Republicans. That's exactly what we needed in order to boost early voting without cannibalizing your day of voting. So that's why this is so important.
I think it's really interesting. We're sort of seeing a trend all across the country. There's even people that think that New Hampshire could possibly be a toss-up at this point.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the New Hampshire takes. The problem with New Hampshire is not that it can't swing a lot, because there's a lot of like libertarians, independents, even like third-party type voters. There's a lot of swing voters in New Hampshire, but the problem is that the Democratic base is larger than the Republican base. Yeah. And so we always need to win like a huge majority of these independents and swing voters in order to flip the state. We're like Kelly Ayotte's probably going to win the governorship in New Hampshire, and Republicans are probably more favored than not to hold the state legislature, certainly the House of Representatives there, which is, by the way, they have like 400 members in their House of Representatives.
Well, do you think that RFK helps that situation at all?
The what?
RFK.
Okay, so actually, there's a thesis for going back to Wisconsin.
There are certain states where I don't think RFK impacts things in Georgia that significantly.
Well,
I think
like in New Hampshire,
but in places like New Hampshire, I do think he has, because New Hampshire's weird.
It is.
First of all, it has like one of the largest legislatures in the world. To give everyone an idea right here, in the Virginia House of Delegates, we have 100 delegates. So I represent somewhere in the neighborhood of 80,000 people, right? My counterpart in the legislature in New Hampshire represents about like
3,000, 4,000.
I don't even think it's that many. Like but it's under 3,000 people. That's how much they represent. So that gives you an idea that they have a much bigger General Assembly. Like I said, it's one of the largest in the world.
So basically, the people are much closer to their representatives.
Yeah.
Yes.
But anyways, look, I don't want to get too much into New Hampshire. We think it's an interesting one. We might say Wisconsin. All right, so Wisconsin, is there anything that you haven't talked about yet that is going to give us an indication of what's going to happen in Wisconsin, or are you just ready to make your prediction?
Yeah, the first thing, the biggest thing that people that are really into this need to keep an eye out for is the Ann Seltzer poll that's going to be coming out in neighboring Iowa on Sunday. So Seltzer is probably the best pollster in the entire country. She had some, I believe Trump was, in 2020, the polling in Iowa was almost tied. It was like Trump was leading by like 1 point maybe. And Seltzer put out her poll right before the election, like literally like 2 or 3 days before the election in 2020, and she had Trump by like 7. Trump ultimately won Iowa by, I believe, about 9. And so she was the one pollster that wasn't hurting towards Biden's going to win or it's going to be 50-50. Instead, she showed very clearly that Trump was doing very well in Iowa, and that was a sign of what was to come. That was also a sign of what was going to happen in neighboring Wisconsin, because Iowa and Wisconsin have very, very similar demographics. It's just that Iowa's redder than Wisconsin. But other than that, they're very, very similar. So if you have a Seltzer poll that shows anything more than probably Trump plus 7 or Trump plus 8, that's a good sign for him in a state like Wisconsin. Now, I wouldn't say that the Seltzer poll is going to be the end-all, be-all. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you can't draw any sort of hard conclusions from it. Like, the Seltzer poll could very well say, like, Trump plus 7, but then 3% are going to independents or third-party candidates, and then at that point it's a wash, and you just can't draw any hard conclusions. But, I've actually talked to quite a few people in things like Twitter Spaces that are really into crunching numbers, that live in Wisconsin, that are on the ground. I have some friends that live in Wisconsin as well. They're really optimistic about Trump. Trump was actually driving around in a garbage truck in Wisconsin yesterday in the Green Bay area.
That was pretty epic. I can't believe he did it.
And I think that with the demographic trends, the secular trends that are taking place in Wisconsin, where black turnout is cratering in Milwaukee County, Democrats are going to crush it in Dane. But the 3 stools that they need in order to pull it off, they're missing one of them, and the other one's kind of shaky at the moment, which is that you might see them not make the type of gains in the wild counties that they need at the same time that they're still bleeding in the western and northern parts of the state. I think that the secular trends that you saw in Wisconsin, where it was like one of the closest states in the country in 2020 that voted for Biden, and it even shifted to the right of where it was in 2016.
Yeah.
People forget that. Wisconsin was about 3 points to the right of the country in 2016. It was almost 4 points to the right of the country in 2020, even though it flipped. Not only that, Biden's margin of victory in Wisconsin in 2020 was smaller than Trump's margin of victory in Wisconsin in 2016. Trump won it by 22,000 and Biden won it by 20,000.
Yeah.
And I think because of all of that, because of the fact that Wisconsin is this state that has a notorious trend for polling misses that favor Republicans, and that the regular politics average barely shows Harris ahead.
Yeah.
I think that Trump's going to win Wisconsin.
All right,
it's
let's go
the
to the
most
map.
likely. It is the most likely of the Midwest states of the 3. I am the most bullish of Wisconsin out of the 3 of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
All right, so that gets Trump to 261, which means if he wins either Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Arizona, that would be sufficient to get him to 270. Nevada is the only one that he could win that still wouldn't get him there. That'll only get him to 267. But next, we're going to go to Michigan. So let's run over to Michigan here real quick. And again, we saw it's kind of interesting. This is one that was not on my bingo card. I did not expect Michigan to really be in play. I'm still skeptical. I'm going to be honest. Michigan is the one out of this list, the 2 that I'm most skeptical of, Michigan and Nevada. And a lot of that has to do with I was shocked when he actually took Michigan at one point, and I wasn't shocked when we went back the other direction, and the fact that he's being very competitive there. Now, I think some of that has to do with what's gone with people leaving the state. I think it's also has something to do with respect to Trump's emphasis on manufacturing and talking about things that actually really, really appeal to the Rust Belt and to the people that were hurt the most by kind of the deindustrialization of these states within the kind of the Midwest. But the latest average has Harris at 0.4, right? So we saw this trend for a while there. Again, in late October, Trump +1, Trump +1, tie, Trump +1, Trump +1. And then the latest, or one of the latest ones to come out from the Washington Post, has Harris up by 1. Now, let's go and take a look at where Clinton was at 6.3 at this time in 2016 and lost Michigan. Biden was at 8.2 and won Michigan, but certainly not by 8.2. So this is another state where the polling was just
really bad.
Abysmal. It was bad. And again, so is this a state where you believe that the polling is just gotten better at accurately reflecting what voters are going to do? Or do you think it's something where, once again, they're just favoring Democrats too much, and this is going to be something where we see Trump, not just not losing Michigan, but actually pulling ahead? So what are you seeing both with the polling and on the ground?
So I think that there's a couple things at play in Michigan. Trump had a rally recently there where he had a bunch of American Arabs show up on stage and endorse him. Right? There was. So
it was the first city in America that has like a complete Muslim dominated like mayor, town council, and the mayor came out and endorsed Trump, which.
And then there's others that are like former mayors or former lawmakers that are Muslims, especially in the Dearborn area, where there's a large Arab and large Muslim population. And I say Arab and Muslim separately because there's also Arab Christians as well.
Yes.
There's a large Lebanese population, and those typically tend to be Maronite Christians. But they are objectively shifting towards Trump, and more importantly, they're shifting away from Harris. So there's a huge chunk of those voters that are going to be voting for Jill Stein and the Green Party as a protest vote against Harris, and then another chunk of them are going to be voting for Trump as a protest against him as well. And I mean, they're obviously upset about what's happening in the Middle East right now, and the Democratic Party has really been divided on everything that's happened in the Middle East since last October. In a way that the Republicans haven't been. And I mean, we saw this with the campus protests and stuff like that. And obviously...
real quick. Before we get to mission, I have to do this because I promised Andrew we would.
Okay.
Andrew, wait a second. No, it was for Michigan. Never mind. Sorry, we're in the right
Okay.
We're in the right lane now.
Actually, you said
Andrew's
there was a question, right?
So Andrew's just reminding me. So Andrew wanted to say the question that he had asked has been, the Secretary of State of Michigan has already come out and admitted that they found somebody that voted illegally. Now, again, you might say, what's the big deal? One person. Well, if they're actually acknowledging that they found one person that voted illegally, and we're dealing with the things that we've done here in Virginia, where Governor Youngkin and Attorney General Jason Miyares were trying to remove non-citizens from our voter rolls. And again, the way that process works in Virginia is the non-citizen informs us that they're not eligible to vote, and then we remove them from the voter rolls. And the Biden DOJ stepped in to try to prevent it. What Andrew's question is that how do you actually prevent voter fraud when you have a situation where the Secretary of State is admitting that it took place, knows it took place, and yet the vote is going to be counted anyways because there's no way to retrieve it? How do you retrieve that person's vote?
There's safeguards in place.
Wait a second. So his question is how do we actually do that, and why can't there be any punishment for that? Now, I want to clarify one thing. There can be punishment for the person that voted illegally. You can still go after that person. You need to have someone willing to prosecute. One of the biggest issues that we get into when it comes to things like voter fraud is who's going to initiate the investigation and who's going to actually prosecute the person based off of it. Because again, there's a great deal of discretion that your local Commonwealth or district attorneys have. And then if you have a DOJ that isn't interested in prosecuting, then they're not going to prosecute. So some of it is about electing people that take the integrity of our elections seriously and will actually prosecute people that do that. But that's the other problem, right? It's this idea that once the vote is gone,
it's gone. And there's a reason for that. The reason is they don't want people to have to be linked to their vote because that can cause retaliation. If they can find out you're one of the people that voted the way they didn't want, they can come and retaliate against you for that. And so there are regulations or laws on the books that once the ballot's through, there's no way to link it back to a person, and that's why it's getting counted.
Yeah, and we've had these battles before where people have argued against voter registration in Virginia because people don't want the government to retaliate, or they don't want people in power to retaliate against people that are registered to vote a certain way. And so that's part of the legitimate concern on one side of not tying like an individual number to an individual person to their vote, right? To make sure that it maintains truly private. But what that means is that you have to do more on the front end in order to protect the integrity of the vote.
Yep.
And they don't want to do that either. And at this point, I'm done playing pretend. We had the Speaker of the House in Virginia come out and chastise the governor for what they did to remove non-citizens from our voter rolls. Keep in mind, this is the same time like in Virginia, and this is not only happening in Virginia, by the way, where Democrats are trying to push for more opportunities for non-citizens to be able to vote at the local level. So the same people telling you, oh, nobody wants non-citizens to vote. They keep setting up these little commissions, these little places that have impact and power and authority at the local level to be able to do that. And that is because ultimately, if you're going to push this idea of, oh no, democracy, and democracy is the only measure that you're using to judge whether or not something is good or valuable, well, then of course, the more people participating, the better it is. I've even seen Democrats, you keep calling them non-citizens or illegal immigrants. These are members of our community and they should be able to participate. Great, then become a citizen and participate. Have some skin in the game. That's part of what being a citizen is, right? But so again, it is a legitimate concern, and it's one of the reasons why electing people that will actually put in rules that make it really easy to vote, but really hard to cheat. That's what you want. And Democrats have done the exact opposite. So I hope that answers your question, Andrew. Sorry, Michigan. So get to what we're seeing in Michigan. We've already talked about kind of the trends historically. We've talked about the trends on what's going on and why Trump might be doing better. But the polling, has the polling improved in Michigan with respect to the quality of the polls, or are they still just as jacked up as they've always been?
I don't think that they're going to be off by like 5 or 6 points like they were in 2020. In that respect, I think the polling has gotten better, but I don't think it's gotten much better. In part because Michigan's demographics are very favorable to a Trump rebound. That's not to say that he's guaranteed to win it, right? But,
why?
Well, you have to consider what type of state Michigan is. Like you were bringing up earlier that there's a large manufacturing base, former manufacturing base, right? It's the heart of the Rust Belt, right? There's a large blue collar, former union, working class, manufacturing, people that work in trades with their hands and manufacturing. And those are voters that have shifted sharply to the right over the last 10 years, let alone over the last like 20 or 30 years. And Trump has a unique appeal to those voters. They feel forgotten and ignored by their own party. They feel hated. They feel like that they feel like their existence, their mere existence, is a personal affront to the Democratic Party. And they're in open revolt, especially in places like, I'm thinking like the Flint area, not the city itself, but around the Flint area. I'm thinking of like Saginaw County. I'm thinking of the Mitten, the northern part of the state, the eastern part of the state. Also consider the suburbs around Michigan. So Detroit suburbs, there are very affluent, rich parts, particularly of like the Ann Arbor area and Oakland County. But by and large, the Detroit suburbs are far more working class, blue collar than the Philly suburbs. The Philly suburbs include some of the richest zip codes in America, and like Delco and Chester and stuff like that along the main line that's heading towards like Lancaster. Those are incredibly wealthy voters that voted for Mitt Romney narrowly in 2012 and have since just completely deserted the Republican Party, and now they're loyal partisan Democrats, basically. They're voting blue no matter who. But the suburbs around Detroit are far more blue collar. Like Macomb County is objectively a working class suburb. And that's very unique to Michigan. Ohio is really one of the only other states where you have like working class blue collar suburbs. In Pennsylvania, the suburbs around Philadelphia and Pittsburgh tend to be far more wealthy, especially around Philadelphia. And so it has demographics that are just very poised to be Trump friendly. And so Trump lost Michigan by the largest margin of the Midwest swing states, not counting Minnesota, which is only tangentially considered a swing state. It's really a blue state that tends to be somewhat close nowadays compared to historically, but it's still a blue state nonetheless. But Michigan was the closest of the three, or sorry, it was the furthest away of the three swing states in the upper Midwest that Trump lost in 2020. Nonetheless, I think that Trump has the potential to gain the most ground. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That doesn't mean he's going to flip it, but I think he will gain the most ground because he lost it by
you've got this up here in 2020 when it came to, this is early voting numbers.
This is modeled. I'm using the same formula. Michigan was one of the few states where I actually tried to, because Michigan doesn't register by party.
Yeah.
I tried my best to do the same type of partisan modeling for modeled Republicans and Democrats that I've done in Virginia. And
what you essentially see here is roughly a 6-point shift from Democrat to Republican in early voting models up to this point.
This is important. This is excluding votes from voters who cast a ballot in person in 2020.
Okay, so you're taking out
the cannibalization argument.
You're taking out the cannibalization. So this is just early voting, these are people that are legitimate early voters. They're not cannibalizing their election day vote. You're seeing about a 6-point shift from Democrat to Republican from 2020 to now.
So here's the funny thing. I did this on October 28th.
Yeah.
And it is now Halloween.
Yeah.
I did it this morning as well. The same formula. And it actually got redder.
Okay.
The shift.
So the trend is not slowed down as we get closer to election, or it hasn't shifted blue as we get closer to election day.
The fact that shift is now over 7 points from where we were in 2020 is, I think, insane, because that is not what's happened in Pennsylvania. And we'll get to Pennsylvania at the end. Pennsylvania, it's closing that gap from 2020, although I would say that it's still favorable to us. And we'll go into more detail at the end of this podcast. But in Michigan's case, I think that there is a legitimate case that you can make that the dam is starting to break for the Democrats right now.
Okay, so before we get to the prediction for Michigan, I want to let everybody know that they should go into our Circle community. You can go into the link into the description on this show. Join our Circle community. We're about to open up a subscription service. Why are we doing this? Well, one, we love the people that advertise with us. We love being able to work with organizations like YouTube when they're not censoring us, but we can't always commit on that. So if you like the sort of work we do, if you like the fact that we say things fairly unfiltered, or in Tina's case, completely unfiltered, going there and actually joining our audience is a great way to do that. It actually helps influence the sort of episodes that we put out. Plus, starting here soon, election night is going to be one of the last times we actually do our live exclusively on YouTube. We've actually found that people watch more of our content on YouTube when it's done as a premiere or a pre-recorded rather than live. But we still want to do live, but we're going to do it for the primary benefit of our audience. So we're going to do our lives within our community. It's going to give you a better chance to be able to ask questions, for be able to get to more questions and give you a better experience, minus a lot of the trolls that sometimes unfortunately come into the live chat. Plus, we have another subscription level. We just did one of these the other night. We had a blast. We do monthly meetups with Tina and myself. This is a chance where you get to come on. We have a prompt. We have a particular topic that we address, but we stayed on there for over 2 hours the other night, just answering questions from the audience, having a back and forth conversation with our members, and it was a blast. We loved it. It was a great time. So if you want to be able to support the show, if you want to be able to get in on those live episodes that we're going to be doing exclusively for our community, and if you want to be able to attain those monthly meetups, go check out the various subscriptions that we now are launching. Plus, if you sign up before November 4th, you get a free 60-day trial. So go ahead and check that out over there. We really appreciate it. Christian, who's winning Michigan, by how much, and how sure are you?
So I'm kind of upset that we have Michigan here in the middle of the list, because I am the least confident of Michigan of all the swing states.
Okay.
All the swing states, I am the least.
Wow, that's because that
of
was
the
not
outcome.
the case 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, you were the least confident about a different state. We'll say which one that is later. But all right, Michigan, where are we going? Or is it still a toss-up in your mind?
No, you can't do toss-ups at this point. It's like we're.
Hey, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled you're not doing toss-ups.
Like,
be bold, my friend.
We've got to, I can't remember. It's funny. There's this there's 3 maxims from the Oracle of Delphi, right? And one of them is, the first one is know thyself, which is interesting. There's a lot in there. The second one is nothing to excess, and the third one is surety brings ruin.
Yeah.
and I love that third one so much, because when you're in the realm of trying to predict election outcomes, like, you're violating the third maxim of the Oracle of Delphi. So. But nonetheless, we're 5 days away from Election Day. You can't leave toss-ups at this point. You have to just be bold and make a prediction.
Yeah.
The cop-out that I will give is my gut says one thing and my heart, or my mind says the other thing.
Okay, what does your gut say?
My gut says that Trump wins the state.
Oh, okay. But your mind says he loses.
That he loses.
Okay, what does he lose?
The rational side of me says that he loses.
Okay.
Because it was like a 3 or 4 point gap between, in 2020.
That's where Christian's pessimism comes in. His brain is hardwired to think the worst.
Yeah, no, seriously. Unironic. Sorry, she caught me when I was drinking Dr. Pepper.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Like, it's a really far bridge that you've got to that you've got to fill. Or sorry, there's a really far gap that you've got to bridge here. And Michigan was decided by like over 3 points in 2020. It actually is of the 3 upper Midwest swing states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. Michigan was the only state that shifted to the left in 2020 from 2016. Now, understand, when I say shift to the left, I don't mean flipped from red to blue, because they all flip from red to blue. What I mean is in relation to the national popular vote of where it was in 2016 compared to where it was in 2020. And then you look at every state's relationship to the 2016 popular vote in 2016. And then you look at every state's relationship to the national popular vote in 2020. In 2020, Wisconsin moved to the right. Pennsylvania moved to the right. At the same time that Trump was losing them. They moved to the right. Michigan moved to the left.
Okay, so where's Michigan? Just do it, man.
So my mind says we lose it, but because you allowed me to do this, you just handed me the reins and said, you get to run this podcast, Christian, just for you, I will put it in Trump's column.
Oh, dang. So that gets him to 276.
Yeah, it does. But understand that I am the least. We're going to go through states that I'm more confident about.
Okay, so where are you on this? Are you like 50? Like 50?
I am genuinely like 50-50.
50-50. Okay, so you know what? I'm going to put it in the blue column. Just because let's go ahead and be okay. Okay, so now we're 261.
I would not be surprised if we lose Michigan.
261 to 241. So I'm the one forcing Christian to be pessimistic. But if you're in Michigan right now, every vote's going to count, baby.
If you are in Michigan,
count.
You might decide the entire fate of the presidency this year, because this could be the closest state in the country.
Okay. All right, well, there you go. All right, let's move on to Arizona. Now, this is one that, again, Arizona have been fairly reliably Republican. Now, obviously, John McCain was very well liked in Arizona. He was very, very well respected and admired, and John McCain and Trump were not buddies. In fact, they were very, very vocal enemies. John McCain, cast the deciding vote, which prevented us from being able to remove elements of Obamacare that I thought were just absolutely horrible. And it really seemed like it was out of spite. There's
a whole swath of quote unquote Republicans who are basically controlled opposition. And I feel like John McCain falls into that. Mitt Romney falls into that. Susan, what's her name?
Susan Collins.
Susan Collins falls
Lisa
into
Murkowski.
Liz Cheney has always been that.
She just endorsed.
Right. Right. And
so did Dick Cheney.
There are a whole bunch of these controlled opposition, what we used to call establishment Republican types, who they're no longer with us. They haven't been with us for a really long time. They were what we call rhinos, Republican in name only, and they're just finally going home is what they're doing. They're just going home. Well, and so I'm just saying.
Well, I say that all to say that Arizona had been fairly reliable, and then when it flipped in 2020, I was honestly surprised. Because I thought with the issues at the border and everything else, but let's also remember one of the things that happens when you actually do a good job of addressing a problem is people sometimes forget it's a really problem when you don't have the right people managing it. And I think Arizona has seen that there is a drastic difference between the way that Trump handled the border and the way that Biden Harris handled the border. And of course, they were on the front lines of dealing with the consequences for that. And I think what you see across the board here, all of the polling with respect to this one-off again by CNN, there keeps being this asterisk.
I think CNN does wishful polling.
Well, the other thing that we should keep in mind is that the polling in 2020 and 2016 for Arizona was actually pretty spot on. It was pretty spot on. The polling in 2020 was a tie. So Arizona did not have polling problems, at least from what I can tell, in 2016 or 2020. So, but right now, all the polling suggests, I mean, you see the last several ones in late October, Trump +2, Trump +8, Trump +2, Trump +4, with an RCP average for October of 2.4. So you generally agree with that? Do you think that's probably underplaying where Trump's at? Because the latest polls actually show him doing better than 2.4.
Polling in Arizona has traditionally been far better than other parts of the country.
Why is that?
Because
better as in accurate.
More accurate.
Right.
The reason for that is because the demographics of Arizona. There's a large, wealthy, college-educated suburban population in the Phoenix suburbs in Maricopa County. These people do answer polls. Mm-hmm. There's also a large retired population in places like Sun City.
So it's easier to get a hold of people.
And it's far easier to get a hold of them. And they're more reliable to answer. And it's not even just landlines, because increasingly pollsters have shifted over to text messaging and online and stuff like that. And yet, even with that shift, just the demographics of Arizona are far more favorable to pollsters. Not only that, but there's more data to collect. So Arizona has party registration data, which arguably, it's not conclusive, but arguably it helps the polling industry in some cases. I know that there's some people that would probably heavily disagree with that claim, but Arizona is just traditionally an easier state to poll in large part because of the way that the state is structured geographically and demographically with who lives there and who votes. The Republicans in Arizona are different than the Republicans in Michigan. They just are. Now there's a type of Republican in Michigan, especially in the Grand Rapids area, that mimics the type of Republican in the Phoenix suburbs. But by and large, Arizona, the Republicans in Arizona are actually very divided. This is part of the reason the state trended to the left since 2016, because the Republicans were at war with themselves, where there was a faction of the party that was much more rhino-centric. Right, Jeff Flake was the former senator from Arizona that came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. Way to go, Jeff!
Did he really
living up to your name right there?
Oh yeah, Jeff too was initially. Oh, this guy was a Tea Party guy.
He's a libertarian
was a conservative.
type guy.
He was a libertarian. Turned into a total punk.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not.
A lot of these people just tuck tail and run, and they don't even, all these things they used to try to champion and that they used to care about, you suddenly realize they didn't care about any of it because people, didn't massage their ego enough.
So the reason that Arizona went blue in 2018 and 2020 and 2022 is because Republicans actually have a party registration advantage in Arizona because it's a traditionally Republican state. But the problem is that Republicans don't win enough Republican voters because there's these moderate rhino-centric ancestral Republican voters that are increasingly voting Democrats. So even when Republicans have like an R+7 or R+8 or even R+9 type electorate, if they're losing 9% or 10% of Republicans to the Democrat, you can lose Arizona as a Republican because Democrats are not losing 9 or 10% of Democrats. Now, that might change this year because Trump has objectively made gains with Hispanic voters and with younger voters. And Arizona has a large Hispanic and large youth population. And those are prime, especially in downtown Phoenix itself, to move to the right. Now, that might not spill out into the congressional races and the senatorial race. You might actually see a decent amount of ticket splitting where Hispanic voters are voting Trump at the top of the ballot and Democrat below, for things like Senate or Congress. But at the moment, there's two things that are going in Trump's favor. One is Republicans have actually increased their party registration advantage from 4 years ago in Arizona. And so that's working in their favor because it means that they have more room to lose ground in with these rhino-type voters than they did 4 years ago. Two, the demographics in Arizona are favorable to a elastic band effect where it's going to revert back to the right, even if it's just a little bit. And remember, Arizona was decided by a very, very slim margin in 2020. It was like one of the three closest states in the country, along with Georgia and Wisconsin. And so any reversion back to the right at all, 1 or 2 points, that's enough to flip the state back. So those two things are going in Trump's favor. I think that what we're looking at right now, when you look at the polling, when you look at the party registration numbers, when you look at the demographic trends and stuff like that, I think that everything is pointing to probably an R+9 and R+10 type of environment. Now, understand when I say R+9 or 10, that does not mean that Trump wins by 9 or 10.
Darn, I was getting really excited there for a second.
That means the electorate is R+9 or 10.
Yeah.
In comparison to the rest of the country.
Well, in a neutral environment.
Okay.
And keep in mind, it's a very good chance that Trump is not winning 100% of identified Republicans.
No, absolutely. You're right. But which column do you put Arizona in then, and by what margin?
So the good news is Trump doesn't need 100% of Republicans if it's R+9 or R+10.
Yeah.
And I believe that the polling is accurate and that Trump is going to win Arizona. And the reason why is because of a couple things. One,
that gives him the election right there without even
with Wisconsin,
without even getting to Pennsylvania yet,
or Nevada for that matter.
And that's with Michigan in the blue line, in the blue side.
Once we get to the end, I'll explain how Trump has multiple paths to the White House. But to put a bow on Arizona, the reason that I think Trump is going to carry Arizona is because the polling in Arizona traditionally is better than other states, and so you can put more trust in. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect or that it's going to nail the result or anything like that. I'm just saying it's not going to be as bad as, say, Wisconsin polling, which is atrocious, or Michigan polling, which is atrocious, right? Polling in Arizona typically is better. the demographic trends, Arizona is perfectly suited for Trump to make gains, especially with younger voters and with Hispanic voters. And Arizona has a lot of both of those two groups.
Yeah.
And when I say younger voters, I don't just mean like younger Black or Hispanic voters. I also mean young white voters.
Yeah.
Young white men are another particular group that are going to zoom to the right. No pun intended, because they're Zoomers, right? Like they're looking at the Democratic Party and they realize that, again, just like working class whites in the upper Midwest, their mere existence feels like a personal affront to the Democratic Party. And at some point, you just stop voting for people who hate you.
You can't hate an entire demographic and still win them over. You just can't. And men are universally hated. All men are universally hated
Yes.
by the left. It doesn't matter if you're white, doesn't matter if you're Latino.
There's also a
Black.
large retired population in Arizona. These are people on fixed incomes. Imagine what inflation has done to them if you're living on Social Security over the last 3 years or 4 years for that matter, right? And so you have vulnerable populations to inflation shock in Arizona more so than other states like North Carolina or Georgia. It's an issue in North Carolina and Georgia for sure, right? But if you're talking about like these wealthy communities in Charlotte or Atlanta, it's not as big of an issue as it is for somebody on a fixed income in a state like Arizona. So when you look at the demographics in Arizona, when you look at the polling history in Arizona, when you look at the trends in Arizona, and you look at the party registration gains in Arizona, all of those I think are pointing to, I think Trump's going to flip the state.
By what percent do you think?
I think he's going to win the state by 1.5, 2 points, anywhere from 1 to 2 points. On the high end, I could say 2.5 points, and on the low end, I would say a point.
Okay.
But either way, he wins.
All right.
But I do think
In
he's
your
going to win.
opinion.
I do
And
think
go
he's
ahead and look at the big map again. Let's look at where we're at on that one.
So we've technically already decided the president.
Technically, that would be 272. So we got 2 more states to go. And again, that's with we had Michigan in the win column. I kind of forced you to put into the lose column.
Yeah.
We got 2 more states to go because let's also face the fact that a shift in Wisconsin that's not anticipated, or maybe even a shift in North Carolina, which would really surprise everybody. And we were predicting North Carolina by less than 2 points. And so you've got to have some of these other states as backup. You got to have some of these other states that can get you to the 270. Let's go to again, the most important one is probably going to be Pennsylvania. So we're going to save that for the end. But let's go to Nevada real quick. Nevada was the one that I think last week when we did this, all of us said that they're going to lose Nevada. Hamilton thought he was going to lose Arizona and win Nevada. We all thought he was going to win Arizona and lose Nevada. What do you now think?
So here's
about
the funny
Nevada?
thing. I think we're more likely to lose Arizona than Nevada.
Whoa. Okay. Wait, back it up there.
So I've already
crazy.
kind of revealed my hand, right? I'm putting Nevada in Team Red's column.
Back it up there, crazy person, because I don't know that I'm there with you on that. So explain why you think we'll win Nevada by more points than Arizona. So you think Arizona
Yes.
by 2?
Yes.
You think Nevada will be more than 2?
And keep in mind, we haven't won Nevada since, 2004?
I think.
We have not won Nevada since 2004 in 20 years.
Okay, so all right, so explain yourself, because you're supposed to be Captain Pessimistic here, and you think we're winning Nevada.
So we are currently, this is not going to hold. I guaranteed it's not going to hold because Democrats are going to surge today and on Friday, and then mail-in voting is the only method through the weekend and Monday. And so, Democrats are going to bank thousands, tens of thousands of mail-in votes over the weekend. Okay. But as it currently stands, understand this is going to drop, right? But as it currently stands, Republicans are leading the early vote in Nevada by over 40,000 votes right now.
Okay, yeah,
Wow.
that is nuts at this stage.
To give you an idea,
Can I just say, congratulations on saying Nevada correctly. We finally got him to stop saying Nevada. It's Nevada.
All right.
so to give you an idea, 4 years ago, Democrats had a early vote advantage of, I believe it was even larger than what the Republicans currently have right now. Democrats in Nevada have always had an early vote lead, and that has created what they called the Clark County firewall, where they have mail-in and in-person voting. In-person would usually kind of be a wash, but Democrats would just run up the score with mail-in voting so large. And this is even pre-COVID, by the way. Nevada's had a long history of mail-in voting, unlike other states. Democrats would run up the score with early voting, but particularly with early mail-in voting, especially in that final weekend where in-person would be closed, but mail would still be accepted right before the election, right? That Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. they would run up the score so large that they would create what they would call the Clark County firewall.
Yeah.
And it would survive. It would overcome the Republican surge in the rural 15 counties of the state that nobody can ever remember, like Esmeralda and stuff like that, like the Elko area, like outside of like Clark and Washoe, right? And that they would hold on. Usually they would only hold on by 2 points, 3 points, under 5, but they would hold on nonetheless. And they won in 2008. They won in 2012. They won in 2016. They won in 2020. And in the midterm elections, they would usually win more often than not.
And can we also say this is one of the few times in 2016 the RCP average had Trump ahead. Had Trump winning Nevada.
That's
a
trend that you will see actually in Nevada. Nevada has been our white whale. It has been our Moby Dick. There's been a long history going all the way back to Sharon Angle against Harry Reid in 2010.
I remember that.
Where the polling shows that we will win and we lose.
Yeah.
Nevada always.
Why?
And the reason why is 2 reasons. One, low propensity voters vote Democrat in Nevada. They use the culinary union machine, the Reid machine, that churns out voters in Clark County that are otherwise not answering the polls. Historically, our voters would answer the polls because our voters in Nevada tended to be the ones that were more likely to answer polls, whereas they were the party of the working class. They were the party that worked. The Democrats were the party of the people that worked in the casinos, not the people that ran the casinos. And things like the culinary union in Las Vegas would just, they built a machine. They called it the Reid machine. They would just churn out these mail-in ballots in Clark County. And this is pre-COVID. And they would build this firewall and they would win. And so we would lead in the polling and then we would lose on election day. And this happened in 2010. This happened in 2016. This happened in 2022. When we lost the senatorial race, we actually won the governorship very narrowly. That was the only state in the country where we flipped the governorship. We defeated an incumbent Democrat governor, and we got a Republican elected at the same time that we were getting crushed in the state legislative elections because Democrats had gerrymandered the legislative districts.
Yeah.
But we lost the senatorial race, and a lot of people thought that we were going to win that, including me. And part of the reason is because the Reid machine. But here's the thing: the Reid machine is dead. It's gone. I was having a Twitter space the other day. It was that 5-hour Twitter space I was telling you about. And we had somebody who got on and spoke for like 20 or 30 minutes. And he was a former member of the state central committee of the Nevada Democratic Party. And he resigned his position this year. And I believe he might be voting for Trump this year. He didn't reveal it, but he is not voting for Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And he told a very detailed story about what has happened to the Nevada State Democratic Party and how they've imploded since 2020. The DSA, the Democratic Socialists, took over the party.
Yeah.
They kicked out the pro-business moderates that Reid had courted and had used to build the machine and fused the fundraising capability of small and medium and large business owners with the machine politics of things like the culinary union and the mail-in ballot process. And they had this happy marriage where you could be a pro-business, pro-market, but still socially liberal, progressive. And you could be welcome within the Democratic Party. They expelled those people, basically, once the socialists took over. And moderate Democrats felt like that they didn't have a home in that party anymore, and they left. And they were the ones that were running the Reid machine.
Yeah.
And so the LARPers that thought that they were going to be staging a communist revolution destroyed the Democratic Party, and now they're incapable of churning out those mail-in ballots to the degree that they previously did, which is why this is the first election in history that Republicans are leading the early vote and not Democrats.
Sean asked a question here that I want you to tackle because I think it uniquely applies to Nevada. He goes, how does no tax on tips affect the red turnout from culinary and hospitality retired chef here? Again, this is one of the areas where your largest population within Nevada is right around Vegas and hospitality
Reno.
And tourism. Yeah, Reno, but the largest part of the population is Vegas.
Yeah, but it'll make a big difference.
It is a tourism state, right? Like that is what it is about, is hospitality state. So yeah, a no tax on tips has an oversized effect in this particular area. So do you think it has an impact on the turnout this year?
I think it does. I think that the other thing that has an impact is the fact that Trump's coalition that he's assembling is uniquely positioned to flip a state like Nevada, arguably more than any other state in the entire country right now. Out of the ones that Biden won in 2020. And the reason why is because Trump is, as we've said before, Trump is gaining with Hispanics. He's gaining with black voters. Black voters are also not showing up
Yeah.
And he's gaining with younger voters. Well, Nevada has a large young population. Nevada has a large Hispanic population. And black turnout in Nevada, there's not a super large black population, but black turnout in Nevada is cratering just like it is elsewhere. At the same time that Trump is going to probably get a larger percentage, especially of black men, than of any state, but especially the Hispanic population. And the tourism industry, and it's not just Hispanics, right? It's also working class whites. There's a very large working class white population. To give you an idea of what's about to happen, if you simply chalk this up to racial demographics and you say, well, this is just Trump making inroads with black and Hispanics, you can shift the Hispanic vote in Nevada 10 points in Trump's favor, and it would not flip the state from 2020.
Wow.
And so what's happened is not really just a shift with Hispanic voters. It's a working class white shift as well. People leave this out. There's a huge working class white population in Nevada as well. And these are voters that have been cast aside by the Democratic Party, just like the working class Hispanic voters. And these are disproportionately male voters as well. Again, do you see how the stars are aligning here, where it's like the exact type of demographic that they're being demonized for their race, they're being demonized for their gender, they're being demonized for the fact that they're not part of the coddled, affluent, professional managerial class that increasingly the Democratic Party is.
So they are pissed. And they are they're associating it directly with the Democratic Party, because this has been a problem too, is people being mad at conditions, but not associating it with a party, or not associating it with their congressperson or their senator or and you're saying at this point, it's like, no, the Democrats have made it so obvious and have been so kind of like outlandish in the accusations and the direction that in their mind, there is no doubt. Nope, it's you. You're the one that doesn't like me, and I'm going to make sure you know that the feeling is reciprocated.
To give you an idea of how big this is, members of the Democratic Party, leadership positions. Again, I had a Twitter space recently where a member of the state central committee of the party quit the party and is very well might end up voting for Trump this year. And in fact, he actually had a lot of good things. He was former military. He's about your age. When we were on the space, he had a lot of good things to say about you. And he was like, I'm really glad that I've discovered Nick, because he kind of red-pilled me and woke me up and convinced me to leave the Democrats. And it's people like that that are tied into the tourism industry, that got crushed by COVID and the inflation, right? Okay. Working class voters with the culinary union and stuff like that, like the collapse of the Reid machine, the turnout advantage. Republicans have closed the registration gap in Nevada, the demographics. You have a revolt with working class and younger voters.
So it's like death by a thousand cuts kind of situation for the left.
I can't emphasize this enough. This has always been an issue, because I've had times before where I would see a voter that was frustrated about something, and then, in my opinion, they had misdiagnosed the problem they identified was correct. They misdiagnosed the cause. And they were very, very motivated to vote for what I thought was going to give them more of the thing they hated. But this doesn't seem to be. Okay, so let's get down to it. Nevada, who wins Nevada, by how much, and how sure are you?
Trump wins Nevada by 2 points.
Wow.
I'm
gonna be honest.
It might be more.
I still have him losing Nevada. But we'll go with you on this one.
To give you an idea of how bad the situation is right now, because we have numbers.
Yeah.
And we have party registration, and over about 2/3 of the expected electorate have already voted. It's not election day; it's election season.
2/3?
An estimated 62% of all ballots that will probably be cast in Nevada have already been cast.
And we almost always win on election day.
And we have a 40,000 vote lead right now.
Yeah, that's
going to collapse because Democrats are going to vote by mail. It could be cut in half potentially.
Yeah.
But there is no way. John Ralston, who is the Democrat number cruncher in Nevada, he's the Oracle of Nevada. He's also a left-wing hack, but he's good at the number crunching. He's good at the number crunching. He is sounding the alarm bells, and he is like, either the mail is coming in right now, and by coming in right now, I mean like Democrats need to be gaining 10,000 votes a day, or it's over already. In Nevada. And that is not an encouragement to people in Nevada that are listening to stay at home. You must vote on election day, because if we don't get our base out on election day, that is the one scenario that we lose. At this point, the only way that we lose this state is if our base does not show up on election day. If they show up on election day and it's just normal.
Yeah, just normal
just
turnout.
Any other year, including years that we previously lost.
Yeah.
If we just have a normal election day turnout on our side, we are mathematically guaranteed to win the state if we show up on election day.
So that has Trump at 278 right now. Now we're going to our final state, the one that for much of this election season, both parties have just poured time, money, and energy into Pennsylvania, and it started way before 2024 because everyone recognized Pennsylvania as the state that could determine it. And again, if we were to start, do this real quick, just so people understand this. Take out Nevada, put Nevada in Kamala's.
Okay.
Why are you making him do this?
Wait. Put Nevada, put Arizona in there. Put Wisconsin in there. Okay. Because we're going to illustrate a point. And this is why we've saved Pennsylvania to the end. Look at the numbers, 268 to 251. All right. Now, provided that Trump wins in North Carolina and Georgia, if he wins in Pennsylvania, we could know by the time the polls close in Pennsylvania that with a high degree of certainty, Trump's winning the election.
Well, we won't know once the polls close.
No. You know. I'm not saying when the polls close. Sorry.
Once Pennsylvania's
been counted, once they're in, once Pennsylvania is called, that right there could be. So even if he lost, like right now we have him. Christian has him winning Michigan. I made him put Michigan back in the Kamala category.
I'm very iffy on that.
He's very iffy on that. That's his hey, everything, all the stars align. But Christian has Trump winning Wisconsin, winning Arizona, winning Nevada, right? But even if he was wrong on all of that, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, the probability that he wins the election is incredibly high.
To give you an idea, mathematically, if he wins Pennsylvania, and we know nothing else, we just know Pennsylvania, his odds of winning the presidency jump to over 90%. So this state will decide. This state almost certainly will decide the White House.
We might even know that before the polls on the West Coast.
We won't.
No, not before
Pennsylvania
it'll be close enough. It'll take a long time.
Almost certainly, we won't even know on election night who wins Pennsylvania. We might not know until Friday who wins Pennsylvania.
I think we'll have a good indication. And this is also going to go into something else that we've got to talk about, and that has to do with the concerns about voter fraud. There was something that just happened in Pennsylvania that had a lot of people worried. You saw this other thing that happened on I think it was ABC News or I can't remember what it was, but one of the news agencies, they were testing election day stuff, and somebody put out the numbers for Pennsylvania on election night with Kamala winning by 2 points.
52%.
And everyone was like, why the heck do you have that? This is just a test we run to make sure everything is going correctly. But for obvious reasons, it was a dumb way to do it because for obvious reasons, people are going wait, how is that already there, right? So let's take a look. Let's take a look at Pennsylvania. So when we pull up the Real Clear Politics average, Trump is winning, and Trump has been consistently ahead in all of the late October polls, with the exceptions of one, UMass Lowell, where Harris was up by 1, and then there was a Bloomberg on October 16th where he was up by 2. But every single poll from, except for that one, from the 22nd of October on, has them either tied or Trump ahead. So Trump ahead by 1, tie, Trump +1, Trump +3, tie, Trump +2, Trump +1. And the overall spread for October polling is Trump ahead by 0.7. So if we look at where Clinton was in 2016, she was up by 3.5 and she lost it. Biden was up by 4.3, barely won it. So two things. One, how accurate has the polling been historically within Pennsylvania? It looks to me like it's not as bad as Michigan or Wisconsin, but still tends to favor Democrats by about +3, +2, +3 points. Do you think that polling has improved in Pennsylvania to more accurately reflect what's going on? And where do you see things going in Pennsylvania?
It would be harder for them to improve off of getting it perfectly right in 2020.
Okay.
Pennsylvania was the only state in the country. Let's take a look here. It was the only state in the country, swing state in the country, to perfectly match.
So the RCP average was 1.2 on election day, and the actual turnout was Biden 1.2. Yep. So they had it spot on
now,
for
this
election
is an average.
Day. Average, but they had it spot on for election day. So they were pretty accurate. And right now, that same polling as of this point has Trump up by 0.7. What should we be looking at in Pennsylvania that gives us any indication of what's going to happen?
So the first thing that we need to look at is, and I've been working very closely with Cliff Maloney and the PA Chase on this. He's been doing some really good work.
Yeah, the PA Chase has been incredible.
Yeah, chasing down early votes and mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania because historically, so to give you guys an idea, Biden won mail-in voting because Pennsylvania basically only has mail-in voting. Biden won mail-in voting by 1.4 million votes. Net votes in 2020. Trump won election day by 1.3 million net votes, give or take, because the actual margin was not 100,000. The actual margin was, I believe, 80,555 votes in 2020 in Biden's favor. And so the goal of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania was we need to get as high of a percentage of the early vote as we possibly can because we cannot afford to lose it 75-25 or, 70-30, right? We can't afford to lose that. And Cliff called me up like 6 months ago or something like that. And he was like, I'm doing this thing in Pennsylvania and I've already got the metrics and the goals. And the goal is we need 27 to 30% of the early vote in Pennsylvania for Republicans and they have party registration, by the way, right? We need 27 to 30% of mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania to be Republican in order for Trump to win this.
Yeah.
And if it's anything over 30%, that's really good. And if we get to 33%, from his position, he thinks that we're guaranteed to win.
Mathematically,
yeah,
we just win. Okay.
So a couple things here.
By the way, we've distinguished this in some others. So in Michigan, we were able to use Christian's modeling with data. In Pennsylvania, you have been actively working on the data and your model in Pennsylvania for the last few months. So this is the one you've probably spent the most time focusing on with your modeling. So what does it look like?
So here's the official returns by party right now in Pennsylvania. And remember when I told you about I pulled out, election day voters that voted early? This is actually important because this is the cannibalization argument.
Yeah.
So Democrats point out that, as you can see the numbers right now in 2024, we're only losing early voting 2-1, which sounds catastrophic, but you have to understand that in 2020, we were losing it 76-23.
Yeah.
And look at the size, 1.2 million. This was on this day in 2020.
Yeah.
And remember, Biden ended up winning a net 1.4 million early votes. And
so
look at the margins now.
So the margin that Biden needed to win by the extremely small margin that he did, he needed a 53% advantage in early voting, and now this year so far he's only got a 27% advantage.
So the Democrats will counter and say you're just converting election day voters from 2020 to early voting, and we're doing the opposite. We're going to be voting on election day and not voting early, so therefore you're just shuffling.
We're just cannibalizing our election day vote.
Yeah, and to that point, I've got a second thing I'm going to show you in a second, but I actually did the math on this, and I went through the same exact numbers, and I pulled out everybody who voted on Election Day in 2020, who are our people. Overwhelmingly, they're our people.
Yeah.
And I removed them from it. And once you do that, you should theoretically get an electorate that's similar to what it was in 2020 if the cannibalization argument's in place, right?
Yeah.
Because even, Democrats might say, well, our people are just going to vote on Election Day. Yeah, but as a percentage, you shouldn't be slipping as a percentage with the early vote, even if some of your people are going to vote on election day, because some of our people would also theoretically be voting on election day, right? There'd be people moving in both directions. We would be picking up, cannibalizing some election day voters, but we would also be having some people return to voting on election day because of the pandemic from 2020.
Yeah.
So we would be crossing streams, whereas they would mostly be moving to election day. But as a percentage, you would theorize that if we weren't gaining ground, that once you remove those election day voters from 2020 from the pool, that their percentage margin in early vote would not be off from where it was in 2020. It would be down in terms of raw numbers, but it wouldn't be off as a percentage. Once I did it, it's at D plus 46.
Which is a 7-point spread from what it was before. It's still 7 points better.
Yeah,
for
7 points better for Republicans.
Even when you account for the cannibalization argument.
So when you account for cannibalization, you get basically.
And this is a state where Biden couldn't afford to lose any.
Well, no, he could afford to lose some. He can't afford to lose more than 1.7%. And right now, Democrats cannot afford to lose more than 1.7%. And right now they're down 7.
This is just early
voting. Yes,
and we understand that election day is going to be bluer, but. There was a Monmouth poll that came out recently that showed Trump winning the election day vote by something like 20%. Mathematically, he needs anywhere from 11 to 15% of the election day vote, and he wins this state by a convincing margin. And by convincing margin, I mean more than 1%.
Yeah.
And one of the trends that I've noticed here is that Democrats are collapsing in some of the bluest parts of the state.
So Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
So we've got, here's another tweet for you. Actually, hang on. Give me 1 second while I
Can I just point out that Christian's Twitter has completely been blowing up?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
people,
I was not expecting.
he's gaining like 1,000 followers a day.
Yeah, I'm getting like 1,000 followers a day, and I don't know what caused that. I've noticed that, like, just, I don't know, people found the number stuff, and maybe the memes.
Yeah.
But anyway, here's Philadelphia.
So Philadelphia was 88. Wait a second. So there's a 6 percentage point change toward Republicans for Philadelphia in early voting.
Yes.
Wow.
So I look at the numbers here.
I mean, some of this too, like how much can we chalk up to the fact that it was 2020 and all the Democrats were very compliant with all the COVID stuff, and they were very much on board with doing everything they were told to do as far as COVID went. So that's why they all voted early. That's why they all did all that. How true is that?
No, it's true. Like, Democrats are going to be voting on election day more so than before. But remember, like, Trump only needs anywhere from 11 to 15 point victory on election day, which he can absolutely achieve. That sounds like a large deal, but understand that in Pennsylvania, Republicans traditionally vote on election day. They almost, I mean, Trump got the overwhelming majority of his votes on election day in 2020.
So let me ask, I need to,
I want to go through the Philadelphia numbers here, though, because this is astonishing. Like, and it got some numbers behind it, but like, I think there's something to be said about, like, I'm not sure that the Democrats in Philadelphia are aware that there's an election going on right now, because in 2020, they had 220,000 returned ballots. This was as of yesterday, 4 years ago, when I put this out. And we had 13,000.
Yeah.
So we were losing the early vote 95-5 in Philly. Today, we're losing the early vote 91 to 9, which, we're still getting destroyed, right?
Yeah.
But look at the change, the raw vote change. They're missing right now. Now, this number is actually going to drop a little bit today because it'll drop every day. But they're missing right now, as of yesterday, almost 94,000 votes in one county.
Yeah.
And we're missing 786.
Yeah.
This is in a state. They're missing 93,000 votes in one county in a state that Joe Biden won by 80,000 votes.
Now, what do you answer, like, PA loyalists on this says COVID
Allegedly
is not a thing
won.
anymore?
Yeah. And I actually, okay, so I went back and forth and I was like, and apparently Philly Democrats voting is not a thing anymore either. and then we actually continued here.
Yeah.
And, this guy loves to counter signal. So
But does some of this stuff kind of highlight as well that maybe their votes weren't as high as recorded?
Well, okay, so let's ask that. Let's ask.
We were
there
talking
is
about
the
this
question-
right before the camera started rolling. You and I were talking about this, and what happened was that the rule change in 2020. And I'm going to let Nick explain most of this. I'm going to give the top line. The rule change in 2020 enabled low propensity Democrats more than Republicans, or just low propensity voters in general, in an environment where Democrats had an advantage with low propensity voters. It made it easy for these 0 and 1 out of 4 voters to show up and vote because they didn't have to show up and vote. Mm-hmm. They were given a ballot. It was sent to them.
Without
they didn't
even
need to request it.
Yeah.
And they could just check it off and send it in the mail, and they didn't have to do anything. And so there were thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of low propensity Democrats that didn't vote in 2016, didn't vote in 2018, did vote in 2020 and didn't vote in 2022, and they only voted by mail. And Democrats haven't gotten them to even request a ballot this year, let alone return one. So, I mean, Nick, you as a legislator know about the rule changes.
It was ridiculous that they could just send out ballots that weren't even requested, because at that point, if it's not requested, you don't even know if they live at that address. Anybody could pick it up. Anybody could sign it. Anybody could date it and pop it back in the mail. There is literally no oversight.
Well, what they like to say is, oh, well, they still got to check the signatures. Okay, yeah, sure. If people are motivated, to do the right thing, then there are safeguards in place. The problem is,
what are they checking the signature against?
Okay, let me finish.
Do you have every single voter's signature in the database, and you're looking and examining it?
I'm going to repeat what I said. If you're motivated to do the right thing, then you have the implements to do it. If you're not necessarily motivated to do the right thing, it's very hard to keep people honest. That's the problem. That's one of the reasons why we say that you need to make it easy to vote but difficult to cheat. And right now we've made it easy to cheat. And that's what a lot of people are concerned about. They're like, okay, great, Christian, we love your numbers. We love the numbers and all this stuff, but how do you, we're already seeing issues in Pennsylvania right now. We already saw an issue in Washington state where somebody dropped an incendiary device in an unmonitored ballot drop-off box, which for most people just seems absolutely absurd, and I concur.
That was a Gaza thing. That was the Free Palestine, Free Gaza. That was a protest by that group, by the way.
The other concern is that if you looked at like the information that Dinesh D'Souza was putting out with 2,000 Mules and things like that, Philadelphia was a main, that featured very, very prominently in that because of things like ballot drop-off boxes. So how do you address, despite the fact that the numbers look pretty good here, the numbers might indicate that Trump is doing better in Pennsylvania and as good as he needs in Pennsylvania to potentially win, how do you address the concerns with respect to potential voter fraud?
By winning by a large enough margin that it doesn't matter.
Too big to rig.
No, here's that's the easy way to encourage people. Go out and vote. Seriously, go out and vote. And we need you to show up on election day, because if you don't show up on election day in Pennsylvania, then we are going to lose Pennsylvania. No doubt about it. Our base, the majority of our base is supposed to show up on election day. Yeah. We've made huge gains with early voting, but if you have not yet voted early in Pennsylvania, show up on election day, because it's too late to request a ballot at this point. And we desperately need you, because this state, as we said at the beginning of this segment, is the state that is almost guaranteed to decide the presidency. If Trump wins this state, his odds of winning this race go from 50-50, we're basically in a 50-50 race right now, to 90+% likely chance of victory if he flips Pennsylvania this year. So if you live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, please show up on election day and vote. Your vote truly will matter. Now, the voter fraud thing, I'm not as concerned about it, in part because we're not in a 2020 environment. Mm-hmm. These what we are experiencing right now is a total collapse, not total, but a catastrophic collapse with low propensity voters in the Democratic coalition. They're high propensity voters. They're showing up. The people with TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, they are showing up to vote. Guaranteed they're showing up to vote. They're bragging about how they're showing up to vote. But their low propensity coalition, young men, working class voters, Hispanic voters, black voters, they're choosing to stay at home and sit at home, or they're choosing to vote for Donald Trump. They were protesting in one of two ways. They're either switching to the Republican, which is unprecedented for these groups, or they're staying at home. And that is the reason that I think that, can
I say this too? Like, I always get people that are if you are going to say that, well, it doesn't matter because they're going to cheat. Well, it certainly doesn't matter if you don't show up. Then you are right. You are a self-fulfilling prophet, and you've created the conditions where they don't even have to cheat to win, right? So that's not a very good excuse. The other thing that I think needs to be taken into consideration here is that, again, if you win by large enough numbers, even when cheating takes place, it's not sufficient to overthrow it. And people say, well, it shouldn't be that way. Concur. I agree. But what do you want me to tell you? Like, I'm trying to be as honest as possible with what I think is the best way to address this. The other thing I will say is this. If you're not actively participating in your sheriff's elections, in your Commonwealth or district attorney's elections, in your state elections, well, then you're the reason why you have voting laws you don't like. You're the reason why you have people that will not prosecute voting fraud. You have to participate not just in the federal elections. Most of your voting laws are determined at the state level. Whether or not those laws actually get enforced are determined by who your district or Commonwealth attorney is or who your sheriff is. And so I don't know what else to tell people. Now, there are things that like, for instance, I know in Virginia, we have done more than we have ever done in the past to try to ensure that voter fraud doesn't take place by hiring more attorneys, strategically locating them in the places where there's been the most propensity for fraud to take place, and having the most people trained up to actually work in the polls as poll watchers in order to identify potential problems as it happens and then to make the call then. Because if you're complaining about something that happened 24 hours ago in an election, I got bad news, it's probably too late. So there have been every mechanism that I can think of to try to prevent fraud has been done within the legal means that we have. Again, so I'm not making excuses here. I'm just explaining the operational environment. If you get a better state legislature, you'll get better laws with respect to preventing voter fraud. If you have a better Commonwealth's attorney or district attorney or sheriff, you'll have people that will be willing to enforce the law and throw the book at people committing acts of fraud. If you have somebody at the federal level that's not going to allow millions of people to cross over the border unchecked, you'll have fewer people that can actually vote illegally. Like, these are the things that we are trying to do this election cycle. And then finally, you can operate as, again, become volunteering at your registrar to be a poll watcher, to be connected in with the people that are also dedicated to trying to prevent voter fraud. That's the way that you do it. So those are the mechanisms that we have. Let's utilize them, and then again, turn out and vote. But I don't know what else to tell people other than that's the way that you address that particular concern. All right, because we got two more things we got to go to. We got to go with I want to go with who's going to win the popular vote.
Well, we got to call Pennsylvania,
He's got to call
don't we?
Pennsylvania first.
Lady, gentlemen, could just calm down for a second. I'm going to get to that because we have to get to those things. Christian, what are you calling Pennsylvania for? By what margin, and how confident are you?
I did some math, and I understand this is back of the napkin math. This isn't as elaborate as the Virginia model, but I did some math looking at just two things alone.
Yeah.
First one is people that have cast a vote early in 2020, and they have not done so in 2024. That number works in our favor because early voters in 2020 were overwhelmingly Democrat. But that number drops every day, right?
Yeah.
Because every day there's somebody somewhere in Pennsylvania who voted 4 years ago early, and they have voted today early, right? So that number does drop over time until election day, but that number is positive for us.
Okay.
The second number is the number of people that have voted early, but also voted on election day in 2020. And that number works against us, because that number is favorable to Republicans, but that's the cannibalization argument, right?
Yeah.
We're just converting our people from election day to voting early. So we have two numbers here to track. We have one number that drops over time and works in our favor, and one number that rises over time and works against us. Now that sounds bad, right? But understand that this ends by election day, right? So it starts enormous. You're starting with a gap that, like, if the election, you're starting with a gap here that would be, R plus 50, right? And obviously Pennsylvania's not going to vote 50 points to the right. So it shrinks over time until you get to a number that actually is realistically what the final outcome will be in Pennsylvania. So I plugged all these numbers in. I pulled all of these numbers from the flip-flopping, right, of election day and early voting in both directions, one that works against us and one that works for us. Once you subtract these numbers out and you end up looking at basically, the delta between them. This is as of yesterday night, as of like 2 a.m. when I was doing this, because I don't have a life and I just pulled data in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I ended up having a taking into account the 80,000 vote margin that Biden won the state by. I had a net change between the two of them that worked in our favor of about 180,000 votes.
Whew. So so call it.
Which means if that happens, Trump, I think, has a chance. I mean, this might be wrong, right? But I think Trump has a chance of winning Pennsylvania by 90,000 votes.
So what does that put it on the percentage? So is that a point?
Point and a half is probably what I think.
All right, so pull up the map.
And I think it could be potentially as high as 2 points.
Okay, so pull up the map. So right now, Christian is calling it again. This is also keeping in mind that people have to show up and vote and not be like, oh, we've got it in the bag. So if people show up with the same motivation, so right now, even if he were to lose Michigan, which you have him winning, he wins by 297 with electoral votes. Go ahead and flip Michigan over, because I want people to see.
Yeah, show us basically best case, worst case.
I want people to see what you think. So you think best case scenario is Trump gets 312 electoral votes.
Best case scenario, he gets 312.
Okay, and that's even better than 2016.
It is, because he flips Nevada, and the way that the electoral votes got reallocated with the census.
Yeah. Okay, worst case scenario. What do you think your worst case scenario is right now?
Worst case, I mean, okay, let's be honest.
Let's say worst case that he wins.
Best case scenario is actually that he, and I think this is I am not understand this is not a prediction. This is Trump landslide, he wins
Within
the
the
national
realm
popular
of-
vote.
yeah.
It's possible, right? But I'm talking
Highly
about he
unlikely.
wins the national popular vote by a decent, healthy margin. Like best case scenario, he flips like Minnesota. And potentially like New Hampshire and potentially that second congressional district in Nebraska. I do not think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Understand that, right? I'm simply saying that is best case
But
scenario.
whenever something like that is within the realm of possibility, what it also requires is for the other side to spend money in states that they shouldn't have to, and that's actually important.
I understand. I do not think that best case. That is not going to happen. When I say now worst case scenario, there's two things of worst case scenario. Worst case is like truly worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Well, no, because both worst case scenarios he loses.
Oh, okay.
So like the truly worst case scenario is he loses all 7 swing states.
Yeah.
And so it's like the 2020 map all over again, except we also lose North Carolina.
Yeah.
That's the true worst case scenario where we get a polling miss in Harris's favor. And this is, Harris wins by 3 or something like that, or 4, and she flips North Carolina and she holds everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the doomer, this turns into 2012 basically all over again, right? Now the more moderate worst case scenario is that Harris, let's see if it actually loads. Harris runs the gauntlet in the upper Midwest. That's the more realistic worst case scenario that I actually fear. I don't really fear the idea that she's going to win all 7 swing states.
Yeah.
But I do fear this.
Yeah.
And that would give her the presidency because unfortunately the losers in the Nebraska legislature didn't have the stomach to do what needed to be done and reallocate the state's electoral votes to winner take all, as the Republicans who run the state should have done. But instead it's going to be, we're going to stand on principle and we think it's too late in the process for us to change this. What do you mean?
Yeah.
This is this fate of the country on the line and you're going to stand on principle. I guarantee you if Democrats were in a position to do this, they wouldn't be doing that. Listen, again, it just goes back into the whole like we think politics is about the marketplace of ideas and they think it's about how do we just eradicate our enemies and adjudicate power as efficiently as possible.
Okay, let's do that. This is what I want to do
But
now.
that's the worst case scenario, the realistic worst case
scenario. So go ahead
scenario.
and plug in what you think is going to happen based off all the predictions you made. And that was you put PA, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
So I honestly, I still kind of want to leave Michigan
I know you're
off the table.
50-50 on that one, but you said Michigan goes. So go ahead and click that one in there. Okay, so this was your, as of right now, what you're seeing the numbers. Michigan is the most shaky out of all of this. But that's where you think we could very well end up on election night, provided that Republicans show up on election day.
If we were to use like lean ratings in here as well in order to indicate degrees of belief. So we have like safe, we have likely, likelier states like Virginia is very likely to go for Biden. I know that there's been a lot of enthusiasm about like my numbers that I put out every day in Virginia. I think that there's a very good chance that Trump can make up some ground in Virginia, potentially by like 4 points, maybe even 5 points. Although I think I wouldn't be surprised if it's more like 2 to 4 points that he gains in Virginia, not like 5 points. But point is that, no pun intended, point is that Trump very well might gain a lot of ground in Virginia. And I know that there's been a lot of enthusiasm with my Twitter followers on the model that I have with Virginia every day, but understand that Trump is the heavy underdog in Virginia. It would take a miraculous land. He would need to be outright winning the national popular vote by like 2 or 3 or 4 points in order to probably flip Virginia. So I do think it's a bridge too far. That's why it's listed as a likely state. Is it theoretically possible? Yeah, it's theoretically possible, but we're talking like less than 10%.
Well, but what it also means, this is the other thing too, people need to understand in places like California, Oregon, Virginia, New Mexico, Minnesota, is that like with Minnesota and Virginia, there is a small chance that Trump could actually pull it off if people really show out in force. But the other things people need to understand, and this also impacts the popular vote. So as people have pointed out, the popular vote doesn't decide anything ultimately, but it does have huge cultural ramifications. If Trump wins not only the Electoral College by 312, let's just say over 300. If he wins it by over 300, that is a solid victory in the Electoral College. If he also wins the popular vote, it sends an incredibly powerful message, right? So it is important culturally. Also, it impacts down ballot races. If Trump loses by 10 in Virginia, we don't win the 7th district. If he loses by 3 in Virginia, we probably do pick up the 7th district. And these are the sort of considerations that people need to be taken into account, right? Showing up to vote and making sure that you're not just voting for the top of the ticket, but you're voting down ballot is incredibly important, because most states, Virginia's an exception to this rule, but in most states, you're not just voting for your federal representation this year, you're voting for your state representation this year. You might be voting for a Commonwealth attorney or a district attorney or a board member of the Board of Supervisors or whatever else it might be. So that's really, really important. So if you're someone that's in Oregon thinking, well, what does it matter? Trump's not going to win. You might pick up a congressperson. You might pick up a sheriff. You might pick up a district attorney that's actually willing to prosecute voter fraud.
And Trump can't even make good on all his promises unless we reinforce him with the people who are actually going to put forth that legislation.
Thank you. Know what? One of the biggest things real quick, nothing is more frustrating than when I hear someone say, well, what does it matter? If you get your chief executive, if you get your president or you get your governor, but you don't hand them a legislature that is willing to pass anything they want to do, all you've done is, at best, you've prevented more bad things from happening. But you can't change bad laws unless you carry a bill to get rid of the bad law. And so people are like, oh, we got Youngkin now. We got the attorney general. We got the lieutenant governor. Okay, great. But we don't have the Senate. The Senate stopped everything we wanted to do. Then we lost the House. Now the entire General Assembly made sure that nothing you wanted ever got to the governor's desk. It works the same way on the federal level. If you do not have a House and a Senate that's willing to do it, I'm not saying the president can't do anything, but you drastically limit the possibilities. So please, if you're in one of these states where we've said, look, we don't think you're going to get it for Trump, that doesn't mean you can't impact your local state legislature. It doesn't mean you can't impact your congressional race. And all of those things are needed in order to affect the sort of change that you want to see.
That also applies to the people who they're going to show up just to vote for Trump and they're going to leave the rest of the ballot blank. Listen, if you show up and you just vote for Trump and you leave the rest of the ballot blank, you're abandoning the man that you're trying to put into place. You are basically tying his arms behind his back and telling him to do everything he promised to do. Don't do that to him. You need to vote down ballot too.
So you need to show up even in a blue state like California or New York because we need to give him the national popular vote. Imagine we will break the left if he wins the national popular vote. If Donald Trump is the man who breaks a 20-year losing streak for Republicans in the national popular vote after everything they've thrown at him. I mean, they're going out there and campaigning. Their closing message is Trump is Hitler. That is literally their closing message. And if we still elect this man and we give him a resounding mandate to govern by not just giving him the Electoral College and hopefully a landslide, but we give him the national popular vote, even if it's by a point, even if it's by less than a point, if he gets more votes than Kamala Harris, that sends a resounding message. It shatters the left. You will see levels of TDS you have never seen before.
It'll be glorious.
These people genuinely believe that he's a dictator. They think he's unfit to govern. They think he's a threat to everything they believe in. And you know what? He is actually a threat to everything they believe in. That's why I'm voting for him. Like when they say he's a threat to democracy, they don't mean it in a small d sense. They mean it in an our democracy sense. He is a threat to their system. And that's the reason why they don't want him to get elected. And if there's any other reason, if you're still on the fence on this, and I know there's some like libertarians that might be, I think the biggest selling point more than anything else is even the chance that he can put somebody like Elon Musk in a position to cut fat within the federal bureaucracy.
I would love to see Elon Musk do to the federal bureaucracy what he did to Twitter. This is another reason why I tell people, like, look, I'm just going to be really honest here. There are things that have frustrated me about Donald Trump from the beginning. I mean, anybody that looks, especially what I do on my short form content or on my mainline videos, I talk so much about what I think, masculinity is supposed to look like, the commitment we owe to our wives, what we owe to our children, what we owe to God, what we owe to our community. And I look at a lot of Trump's history and I'm not impressed. That's what it comes down to. I'm not impressed. I look at some of the positions he's taken on issues of life, not impressed. I look at some of the other issues, not impressed. But for the first time in my lifetime, I feel like I finally have a presidential candidate that understands what a tremendous threat this ever-growing federal bureaucracy has become to mean for a free people, for a free society, and is willing to take it on. and is not afraid to tell us he's going to take it on. He's burned the bridges that so many other Republicans insist on maintaining so that he can leave us with no doubt that he's serious about what he intends to do. And because of that, I'm the most excited I've ever been to vote for a presidential candidate, despite the areas of disagreement I have. It's because on that one point, going after the federal bureaucracy. This has been talked about by so many historians. It's been talked about by so many political analysts. If you want to see what ultimately ends up killing free societies, it's not the invading art. Nobody is crossing the Pacific and Atlantic to take us out. That isn't happening. But we can die by suicide. And right now we have a massive federal bureaucracy. Plus, we have all these client institutions, these culturally shaping client institutions that are so in bed with the left that they are using my tax dollars to try to indoctrinate my children.
Thank you, Larry Sabato.
And there's nothing on the opposite side, right? There's nothing on the opposite side of that. And for the first time, I have a president, I have a vice president, and I have other people that are willing to say, we see exactly where the problem is. And you know what? Unlike the left, we're not going to kick you out from all of society. You still get to compete for your ideas, but you don't get to do so by confiscating our dollars in order to finance your efforts. You want to compete in the realm of ideas? You want to compete in the marketplace of ideas? You can do it without direct tax subsidization. Go do it yourself. Stand on the merits of your ideas. Don't fleece taxpayers in order to put us in an uncompetitive position. And that's what's going on here. So you better believe it. I have never been this motivated to go out and actually vote for the Republican presidential candidate. Despite problems I have on certain realms, because that is the thing I see as the single most important issue of my lifetime so far with respect to American electoral politics.
I totally agree. And because Nick handed the reins to me, I'm going to break the rule and actually read. It's not actually super long, but this is my closing pitch for Trump. This is the last episode we're doing before the election. And I wrote this a month ago. And this is my argument. I just wrote this up from the heart because this was the reason that I am voting for Trump. Because I didn't, for the audience that's listening, I did not vote for Trump 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm the only one in this room that didn't vote for Trump 4 years ago. I voted for the cringe Libertarian Party 4 years ago. And what a journey it has been since then. But I think that there's a lot of people that felt this. And I've just got to read it off.
All right, go ahead.
Donald Trump is not an ideal politician. He is not a paragon of virtue, an orator for the ages, a policy expert, the guardian of our Constitution, or a champion of American conservatism. But that's precisely the point. We don't need him to be any of these things. What matters is that Donald Trump represents something far more fundamental, something that goes beyond the superficial expectations of decency and decorum that our existing liberal establishment has weaponized for decades to neuter any genuine opposition. Trump is a blunt instrument, a necessary battering ram against a ruling class who openly despise their own nation. The goal of electing Trump isn't to save America from decline, because we're already there. The rot in our institutions is deep. The long march is complete. The managerial class have come to dominate our country through control of the media, academia, the bureaucracy, and the courts, all while shoving policies down the throats of Americans who want no part in their twisted vision of progress. Trump is no Washington or Cincinnatus. He's not here to save or fix a broken system. He's here to tear it down, or at the very least, to give the people a voice to say, enough. Trump's candidacy is about disruption, rejection, and the refusal to continue accommodating people who hate us. The goal of electing Trump is to signal that millions of Americans are no longer willing to coexist with a suicidally insane ruling class that has pushed its values, its agenda, and its warped sense of morality onto the rest of us for far too long. The left has made it clear they view us as the enemy. They want to replace our culture, rewrite our history, and redefine what it means to be American. We are no longer interested in compromise because we have seen what compromise gets us. Nothing but further submission. He is a voice of defiance, a means through which we say, we reject you, your values, and your entire worldview. He is the battering ram against a regime that has overstayed its welcome, and through him, we will make it clear we are no longer interested in compromise or coexistence. Only victory. That's the closing pitch.
There it is.
So
there it
here's
is.
so here's yeah, it's
Christian, you're going to end up leading the revolt here.
well, I want one more. There's
I remember that meme you sent.
I want one more. I want one more thing before we close out. Your prediction for the popular vote. Does Trump win the popular vote or not? By how much and how confident?
Here's the black pill. He loses the popular vote by like a point.
By a point. Okay.
That's what I think is going to happen. I
Unless
think he'll
we get
lose
out-
it by a point, maybe a point and a half.
Now I will say this:
It's
if any-
possible for us to win it though.
it is. It's within striking distance in a way that it hasn't been for some time. The other thing I will say this too, just as a final parting shot, the betting odds. The betting odds right now, the RCP average. So this is Bet Online, Betfair, Betson, Bovada, BWin, PointsBet, Polymarket, S Markets.
Somebody said Polymarket's crashing for Trump again.
The RCP average is 62.4% Trump victory. So that's not he wins by 62%. That is 62% odds that Trump wins.
Yeah. Somebody
the
was saying that
election.
the poly market for Trump is tanking today. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't looked at it.
Betting markets can be manipulated.
Yeah, they can be. Trifle asks, one more question here. Trifle asks, how screwed is Washington State?
Very screwed.
I will say this. You guys got a lot of... I lived in Washington State for 5 years. Tina and I, we were stationed out there. 2 of our kids were born in Washington
But
State.
you need to
Beautiful
vote.
area. But there's a lot of work that has to be done at a local level. I remember being there when Rossi was running for governor.
And they did
and
like
he
4
won.
recounts.
He won. There was a recount. He won again. There was another recount. He won again. It was like the 3rd or 4th recount where enough votes from King County, where Seattle is at, finally came in. He won. And then the Democrat gets up there and goes, the people of Washington State have been through enough.
The people have spoken.
Oh, they've been through enough now that you won. So I would just say there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done there, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So overall, there you go. Look at the map. This is the map from Christian. This is the most optimistic
You've ever
election
seen
map
me.
I have ever seen Christian do. The one on here that he is not as sure on is Michigan. I'm going to say that right now for the record in case Michigan doesn't go. That was the only one he said 50-50. But right now, if everything holds the same, Michigan could definitely flip. But either way, it is looking like Trump is going to win the election, but only if people watch this and then go out and vote. If you haven't voted already, you got to either go out and vote. In most places, you're getting close to the point where you can't vote early or you can't.
And
there's no more
drag
mail-in
your
requests.
friends and family out to vote. Annoy the crap out of everybody, you guys.
Yeah.
Just do it. Be that person. Go drag them in. If you know people who are like, I don't really care, they're all the same. After you smack them in the face a couple times, drag them to the polls to go and vote.
If you don't come, Lagatha, the why haven't you voted Yorkie, will visit you and visit again. She's named after a Viking, a mythical Viking, but she's named after a Viking. So unless you want her to show up and invade and pillage your English monastery, show up and vote. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Christian, to all of his analysis. Go to his Twitter, Christian Hines, if you want to get regular updates, oftentimes at 3:00 in the morning, on what is going on in American politics. Thank you for joining us. Please go check out the links in the description. Support the people that are supporting the show. Also consider joining and becoming a member. We will see you on election night for some live coverage. We're actually going to have to phone Christian in because he has been hired to go up and do some analysis up in Pennsylvania, but we'll make sure that we call him up and get some of his on the spot analysis as things go. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.